Hannah Lawson was born and raised in the serene city of Asheville, North Carolina. Her parents, Charles and Margaret Lawson, were well-respected members of the community. Charles owned a local hardware store, while Margaret was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Anna, the middle child, had an older brother named Michael and a younger sister named Olivia. From an early age, Hannah was the apple of her parents' eyes. Anna exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Anna pursued her dream by attending the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she earned her degree in education. After college, she returned to Asheville and secured a teaching position at a local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Hannah had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Anna met Lucas Morgan at a friend's wedding. He was charming, quick wit, and an easy smile. Lucas, a financial consultant from Charlotte, was visiting Asheville for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. Lucas lavished Hannah with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year, Lucas proposed. Hannah, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Hannah's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about Lucas. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Hannah, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that Lucas was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Hannah's friends from Asheville and Lucas's associates from Charlotte mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in Maui, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. Lucas Morgan was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. His parents, Arthur and Laura Morgan, struggled to make ends meet. Arthur worked as a mechanic, while Laura held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. Lucas, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, Lucas exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University, where he studied finance. Lucas's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. Lucas quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described Lucas as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. Lucas's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When Lucas met Hannah Lawson, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like Lucas was truly in love for the first time, but as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. Lucas's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. Lucas's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habit. He kept these issues hidden from Hannah, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Hannah as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where Lucas's deceptions began to catch up with him. Maui, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for Lucas and Hannah's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Hannah documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Hannah's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. Staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, Lucas suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Hannah, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. Lucas later recounted that Hannah had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to Lucas, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Hannah. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Hannah was nowhere to be found. Lucas's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Hannah. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, Lucas's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. Police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Hannah's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Hannah vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, Lucas's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Mitchell was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Mitchell arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview Lucas Morgan. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Mitchell observed Lucas's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. Lucas recounted the events of the night. Hannah disappeared, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Mitchell listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Hannah might have had to leave. Lucas's answers were consistent, but Mitchell felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with Lucas's story, while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that Lucas seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. Couples staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Mitchell's team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Hannah's belongings neatly packed, passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. Tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Mitchell looked into Lucas's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, Lucas was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Mitchell interviewed Lucas's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described Lucas as charming but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that Lucas had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and Lucas had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that Lucas was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around Lucas grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Hannah's handwriting found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about Lucas. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Mitchell felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Hannah, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into Lucas Morgan's affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Mitchell and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. Lucas's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debt. As Mitchell delved deeper, he discovered that Lucas had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Miami, Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving Lucas with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. Lucas's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play with Hannah's disappearance. Questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Mitchell's team found that Lucas had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Hannah, raising further suspicion. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about Lucas's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Hannah, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that Lucas's involvement in Hannah's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Mitchell knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of Lucas's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of Lucas Morgan's double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. Lucas's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglement. Detective Mitchell and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about Lucas's deceptive nature. One of the women, Amanda Taylor, marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with Lucas as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Hannah. Amanda was unaware of Lucas's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Samantha Lee, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and Lucas had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Samantha, too, was in the dark about Lucas's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Stephanie Grant, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with Lucas for nearly 2 years. Stephanie's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how Lucas had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Stephanie, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Hannah's disappearance. Lucas's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized, to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Hannah spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how Lucas would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that Lucas might have seen Hannah as both an obstacle and a solution to his problem. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, pressure on Lucas had reached a breaking point. Hannah's disappearance and the subsequent focus on Lucas threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Mitchell pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depth of Lucas's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Mitchell believed he had a clear picture of Lucas Morgan's involvement in Hannah's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Ethan Brooks, private investigator from New York. Ethan contacted Detective Mitchell, claiming to have crucial information about Lucas Morgan and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Mitchell arranged a meeting in a dimly lit cafe. Ethan revealed his connection to the case. Ethan explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate Lucas Morgan months before Hannah's disappearance. His client had suspected Lucas of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Ethan's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking Lucas's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealing. But Ethan's most startling revelation was about Hannah. According to his findings, Hannah had discovered Lucas's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying Lucas. This friend, concerned for Hannah's safety, had anonymously hired Ethan to gather evidence, hoping to give Hannah a way out of her situation. Ethan provided Detective Mitchell with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between Lucas and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that Lucas had been plotting something sinister. Although the details were vague, this new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Hannah might have been aware of Lucas's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Mitchell considered the idea that Hannah could have staged her disappearance to escape Lucas's clutches. Although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove, Mitchell decided to re-interview everyone involved. Armed with the new information, he spoke again with Hannah's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Hannah's best friend, Karen Bennett, revealed that Hannah had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Karen about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about Lucas. Lucas's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Hannah's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Ethan Brooks as fabrication. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicions surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Mitchell to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Hannah, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on Lucas, began to speculate about Hannah's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Mitchell faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Ethan Brooks provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Mitchell knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Hannah Lawson's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Mitchell and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed Lucas Morgan was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Hannah had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. Breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of Hana, Maui discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Hannah's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Hannah. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Hannah had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation after uncovering Lucas's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Hannah's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Mitchell interviewed Hannah extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering Lucas's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Ethan Brooks had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. Lucas Morgan was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Ethan Brooks, combined with Hannah's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of Lucas's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Hannah returned to Asheville, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded. Hannah remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Mitchell reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Hannah Lawson's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered. At the heart of this tragic tale were three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined in a web of forbidden desire and deadly consequences. Olivia Daniels, a 68-year-old retired librarian with a passion for romance novels, had always yearned for excitement beyond the pages of her books. Her husband, Walter Daniels, a 70-year-old former high school principal, was a pillar of the community in Tarrytown, New York, known for his strict moral code and unwavering principles. The catalyst for the unfolding drama was Dylan Carter, Walter's 20-year-old son from a previous marriage, a brooding artist with soulful eyes. In a troubled past, Dylan had recently moved into the Daniels household, bringing with him an air of youthful rebellion that would soon ignite a passionate and ill-fated affair. As the crisp autumn air settled over Tarrytown, no one could have predicted the storm that was about to engulf the Daniels family. What began as a seemingly innocent connection between a stepmother and her adult stepson would spiral into an obsession that defied societal norms and familial bonds. Olivia Daniels was born in 1956 in a small town in upstate New York, the only child of a seamstress mother and an absent father. Olivia learned early on to find solace in the world of books. Her childhood was marked by loneliness and a yearning for the kind of romance and adventure she read about in her beloved novels. As a young woman, Olivia pursued a degree in library science, driven by her passion for literature and her desire to surround herself with stories. It was during her college years that she first married a charismatic philosophy student named Ron Carter. The marriage was short-lived, ending after just 2 years, when Ron's wanderlust led him to abandon Olivia for a spiritual journey in India. Heartbroken but resilient, Olivia threw herself into her career, eventually becoming the head librarian in her hometown. Her second marriage to a local accountant named Leonard Stone lasted longer but was marked by a growing sense of dissatisfaction. Leonard was kind but unimaginative, and Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to the passionate tales in her romance novels, longing for the kind of all-consuming love she had never experienced. It was in her late 50s, newly divorced and feeling that life had passed her by, that Olivia met Walter Daniels. He was everything her previous husbands were not: distinguished, intellectual, and financially secure. Walter, a widower, seemed to offer Olivia the stability and respect she craved, and she was flattered by his attention. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within 6 months, Olivia found herself relocating to Tarrytown as Mrs. Daniels. The move represented a fresh start, a chance to reinvent herself in a new community. Olivia threw herself into the role of the principal's wife, joining local book clubs and volunteering at community events. Yet, as the years passed, familiar restlessness began to creep in. Walter, for all his virtues, was set in his ways and showed little interest in the passion and spontaneity Olivia craved. She found herself spending more time alone in their house, retreating into her books and secret fantasies. It was into this simmering discontent Dylan arrived, bringing with him a youthful energy that stirred something long dormant in Olivia's heart. Little did she know that her stepson's presence would awaken desires that would lead them all down a path of no return. Dylan Carter came into the world on a stormy night in 2004, the product of Walter Daniels' brief second marriage to Megan Foster, an art teacher 20 years his junior. From the beginning, Dylan's life was marked by conflict and upheaval. His parents' relationship was tumultuous, with Megan's free-spirited nature clashing constantly with Walter's rigid traditionalism. The marriage ended when Dylan was just 5 years old, with Megan gaining primary custody. She moved them to Burlington, Vermont, where she pursued her artistic passion and exposed young Dylan to a bohemian lifestyle that was worlds away from his father's conservative values. Weekends and holidays with Walter became a study in contrasts, leaving Dylan torn between two vastly different worlds. As he grew older, Dylan began to exhibit his mother's artistic talent and rebellious spirit. His teenage years were marked by increasingly frequent clashes with authority, both at school and during his visits with Walter. He experimented with different art forms, from graffiti to performance art, often pushing boundaries and testing limits. Dylan's relationship with his biological mother, while close, was complicated by Megan's struggles with bipolar disorder and substance abuse. There were periods of intense creativity and joy, followed by dark times when Dylan found himself taking on the role of caretaker. This instability left its mark, contributing to Dylan's brooding personality and his difficulty in forming lasting relationships. At 18, Dylan's world was upended once again when Megan, in the throes of a manic episode, was involved in a car accident that left her hospitalized and unable to care for herself. With his mother facing a long recovery and his own future uncertain, Dylan reluctantly agreed to move in with his father and Olivia in Tarrytown. The transition was far from smooth. Dylan, with his tattoos, moody demeanor, and avant-garde artistic sensibilities, stood out like a sore thumb in the conservative town. He clashed frequently with Walter, who saw his son's lifestyle as a personal affront to everything he stood for. It was Olivia who first extended an olive branch, recognizing in Dylan a kindred spirit, someone who, like her, felt out of place in the stifling atmosphere of Tarrytown. Her attempts to connect with her troubled stepson would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. As Dylan settled into life in the Daniels household, neither he nor Olivia could have foreseen the dangerous attraction that was about to blossom between them, an attraction that would shatter the fragile peace of their family and the town itself. The seeds of obsession were planted on a sultry August evening, just 3 months after Dylan had moved into the Daniels' home. Olivia, unable to sleep in the stifling heat, had wandered down to the kitchen for a glass of water. She paused in the doorway, transfixed by the sight before her. Dylan stood bathed in the pale light of the open refrigerator, shirtless and glistening with a thin sheen of sweat. He was absently sketching on a napkin, his brow furrowed in concentration. Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat, suddenly acutely aware of the young man's physical presence in a way she had never been before. Dylan looked up, startled by her presence. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Olivia, flustered, mumbled an apology and retreated to her bedroom, her heart pounding with an excitement she hadn't felt in years. From that night on, Olivia found herself hyper-aware of Dylan's presence in the house. She began to seek out opportunities to be near him, offering to bring him snacks while he worked on his art in the garage or lingering in the living room when he watched late-night movies. At first, Dylan seemed oblivious to the change in his stepmother's behavior, but as the weeks passed, he began to notice the way her gaze would linger on him, the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke to him. Part of him was uncomfortable with the attention, but another part, the part that had always felt starved for affection, basked in it. Olivia's obsession grew in secret. Hidden behind the facade of maternal concern, she began to imagine scenarios where she and Dylan might be thrown together, engineering innocent encounters that allowed her to be close to him. She volunteered to do his laundry, savoring the scent of him on his clothes. She insisted on driving him to his art classes in town, treasuring the moments of closeness in the car. As autumn approached, Olivia found herself falling deeper into fantasy. She imagined Dylan as the hero of her romance novels, seeing in him the passion and danger she had always craved. In her mind, their age difference and familial connection faded away, replaced by a narrative of star-crossed lovers defying societal norms. Walter, absorbed in his work and community obligations, remained oblivious to the changing dynamics in his home. He saw Olivia's attentions to Dylan as nothing more than a stepmother trying to bond with her new stepson, and he was pleased by what he perceived as a thawing in the frosty relationship between his wife and son. But beneath the surface, tension was building. Dylan, conflicted by his growing awareness of Olivia's interest, began to withdraw. He spent more time locked away in the garage, working on increasingly dark and introspective pieces of art. Olivia, interpreting his withdrawal as a challenge, only intensified her efforts to connect with him. As the leaves began to turn and a chill crept into the air, the Daniels household teetered on the edge of a precipice. Olivia's obsession, fed by years of unfulfilled desires and romantic fantasies, was about to spill over into reality, setting in motion a series of events that would end in tragedy. The line between fantasy and reality blurred on a rain-soaked evening in late September. Walter was away at a conference, leaving Olivia and Dylan alone in the house. The power had gone out, plunging the old Victorian into darkness. Olivia, armed with candles, made her way to the garage, where Dylan had been working on a new sculpture. She found him frustrated, unable to continue his work without proper lighting. In the flickering candlelight, Olivia saw an opportunity. She suggested they pass the time with a glass of wine, an offer Dylan reluctantly accepted. As they sat in the dimly lit kitchen, the storm raging outside, Olivia began to open up about her past, her unfulfilled dreams, her loneliness. Dylan, perhaps softened by the wine and the intimate atmosphere, found himself sharing his own insecurities and fears. He spoke of his troubled relationship with his mother, his feelings of inadequacy in his father's eyes, his struggle to find his place in the world. Olivia listened with rapt attention, her hand occasionally brushing against his in a gesture of comfort, sent electricity through them both. As the night wore on and the wine flowed freely, conversation took a more personal turn. Olivia, emboldened by the alcohol and the charged atmosphere, confessed her attraction to Dylan. She spoke of how he had awakened feelings in her she thought were long dead, how she saw in him the passion and artistry she had always craved in a partner. Dylan, conflicted and overwhelmed, tried to resist. He spoke of the inappropriateness of the situation, of his respect for his father, but Olivia persisted, moving closer, her voice dropping to a husky whisper, as she detailed the fantasies she had been harboring. In the candlelight, with the storm howling outside, the boundaries between right and wrong began to blur. Their first kiss was tentative, almost chaste, but it quickly deepened, years of pent-up desire and loneliness pouring out in a flood of passion. Olivia's hands roamed over Dylan's body, marveling at his youthful firmness, so different from Walter's aging frame. Dylan, despite his initial reservations, found himself responding to Olivia's experienced touch, her confidence igniting a fire within him. They made love on the kitchen floor surrounded by guttering candles, the storm providing a soundtrack to their illicit passion. In the aftermath, as they lay tangled together on the cold tiles, reality began to seep back in. Dylan, overcome with guilt and confusion, retreated to his room without a word. Olivia, flushed with triumph and lingering desire, began to plan how to ensure this was not a one-time occurrence. The next morning brought awkwardness and averted gazes. Dylan tried to apologize, to suggest they forget what had happened, but Olivia was having none of it. She cornered him in the hallway, pressing her body against his as she whispered promises of discretion and future pleasures. Dylan, still reeling from the events of the previous night, found himself agreeing to continue their affair, partly out of desire and partly out of fear of the consequences if he refused. And so began a dangerous dance of secrecy and passion. Stolen moments in dark corners of the house, hurried encounters when Walter was occupied with work or community events. Olivia blossomed under Dylan's attention, feeling more alive than she had in years. She lavished gifts on him, expensive art supplies, designer clothes, justifying the expenses to Walter as attempts to help Dylan feel more at home. Dylan, for his part, found himself torn between guilt and a growing emotional attachment to Olivia. She offered him the unconditional love and acceptance he had always craved, albeit in a form he had never expected. His art took on a new intensity, filled with themes of forbidden love and hidden desires. As autumn deepened into winter, their affair intensified, the risk of discovery adding a thrilling edge to their encounters. But beneath the passion, a current of unease was growing. Both Olivia and Dylan knew that what they were doing could not last forever. That discovery would bring consequences neither of them was prepared to face. Yet, caught in the throes of their forbidden love, they continued on, heedless of the gathering storm. As the affair between Olivia and Dylan intensified, so did the complexity of maintaining their double lives. Every day became a careful choreography of stolen glances, secret touches, and elaborate lies. The Daniels house, once a symbol of respectability in Terrytown, now harbored a scandal that would shock the community to its core, ever revealed. Olivia threw herself into her role as the perfect wife and stepmother with renewed vigor, perhaps compensating for her guilt. She hosted dinner parties for Walter's colleagues, baked cookies for the church bake sale, and volunteered at the local library. To the outside world, she appeared more engaged and vibrant than ever, and many in the town remarked on her apparent renewed zest for life. Meanwhile, Dylan adopted a surly, withdrawn persona in public, playing up the role of the troubled artist. This allowed him to spend long hours alone in the garage studio without arousing suspicion. His art took on a feverish quality, filled with hidden symbols of his forbidden relationship, a recurring motif of an older woman's hands, landscapes that hinted at secret, shadowy places. Their encounters became increasingly daring. Quick tryst in the laundry room while Walter watched football in the den, passionate embraces in the garden shed, the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with their heated breaths. Once, they even made love in Walter's study, the thrill of possible discovery adding a dangerous edge to their passion. But living a double life took its toll. Dylan began to struggle with insomnia, spending long nights staring at the ceiling, torn between desire for Olivia and guilt over betraying his father. His artwork, while praised for its raw emotion, began to disturb those who viewed it. Underlying tension and conflict evident in every brushstroke. Olivia, for her part, became increasingly possessive and demanding. She would fly into quiet rages if Dylan so much as spoke to a woman his own age, her jealousy all the more potent for having to be hidden. She began to take risks, leaving love notes in Dylan's pockets or sending suggestive text messages at all hours of the day. The strain began to show in small ways. Dylan became forgetful, once calling Olivia darling at the dinner table before catching himself. Olivia would sometimes gaze at Dylan with undisguised longing, only remembering to compose herself when Walter cleared his throat pointedly. As winter settled over Terrytown, the pressure of their secret began to weigh heavily on both Olivia and Dylan. They found themselves jumping at small noises, paranoid that every ring of the doorbell or unexpected visit from a neighbor would lead to their exposure. The thrill of their forbidden romance was increasingly overshadowed by the constant stress of maintaining their deception. Despite the growing tension, neither Olivia nor Dylan could bring themselves to end the affair. They had become addicted to each other, the passion and intensity of their encounters. But as the new year approached, both began to sense that their carefully constructed house of cards was on the verge of collapse. Walter Daniels had always prided himself on his powers of observation. As a former principal, he had honed the ability to detect when students were lying or hiding something. It was this keen eye that began to pick up on subtle changes in his household as the winter progressed. At first, the signs were easy to dismiss. He noticed Olivia humming to herself more often, a spring in her step that he attributed to a new book club she had joined. He observed Dylan spending more time at home, which he interpreted as a positive sign that his son was finally settling into life in Terrytown. But as January gave way to February, more troubling patterns emerged. Walter began to notice hushed conversations that would abruptly cease when he entered a room. He caught Olivia and Dylan exchanging long glances across the dinner table, their eyes communicating something he couldn't decipher. One evening, Walter came home early from a school board meeting to find the house eerily quiet. As he approached the garage, he heard muffled voices and what sounded like a stifled laugh. When he opened the door, he found Olivia and Dylan standing unnaturally far apart, both looking flushed and disheveled. Olivia quickly explained that she had been helping Dylan with his latest art project, but Walter couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Walter began to pay closer attention to his wife's behavior. He noticed her taking more care with her appearance, wearing perfume even on days when she had no plans to leave the house. He found receipts for expensive lingerie hidden in her dresser drawer, items he had never seen her wear. Dylan, too, began to act strangely around his father. The young man, who had always been moody but generally respectful, now seemed unable to meet Walter's eyes. He became defensive when questioned about his daily activities, and Walter once overheard him having a heated, whispered argument with Olivia in the kitchen. As suspicion took root in Walter's mind, he found himself lying awake at night, replaying conversations and interactions in his head. He began to question everything, from Olivia's sudden interest in Dylan's art, to the way the two of them always seemed to end up alone together in the house. Despite his growing unease, Walter hesitated to confront either his wife or his son directly. Part of him didn't want to believe what he was beginning to suspect. But as winter dragged on, the tension in the Daniels household continued to build, pushing inexorably toward a breaking point. The day everything came to a head began like any other. Walter left for work early, his mind preoccupied with the mounting evidence of something amiss in his home. Olivia and Dylan, believing they had the house to themselves, let their guard down. They were in the midst of a passionate encounter in the master bedroom when they heard the front door open. Walter, having forgotten some important papers, had returned unexpectedly. In their panic to separate and dress, Olivia and Dylan failed to hear Walter's footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door swung open, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Walter stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Olivia, her blouse half-buttoned, stood by the window, while Dylan scrambled to pull on his jeans. The silence was deafening, broken only by Olivia's sharp intake of breath. Then, as if a dam had burst, Walter's rage exploded. His face contorted with fury, he launched into a tirade, his voice rising to a roar that echoed through the house. "How could you?" he demanded, his words directed at both his wife and son. Olivia, recovering from her initial shock, attempted to approach Walter, her hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. She began to speak, her words a jumbled mix of apologies and excuses. She talked about loneliness, about feeling abandoned and unloved. She tried to explain the connection she felt with Dylan, how he understood her in a way Walter never had. But her words only seemed to fuel Walter's anger. He rounded on Dylan, demanding to know how long this had been going on. Dylan, pale and shaking, attempted to shoulder the blame. Spoke of manipulation, of confusion, of feeling trapped, but his words rang hollow, and Walter could see the genuine emotion in his son's eyes when he looked at Olivia. As the confrontation escalated, the room seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. Walter's rage, initially explosive, cooled into something harder, more dangerous. His voice, when he spoke again, was low and controlled, but trembling with suppressed emotion. He told Olivia that their marriage was over, that he wanted her out of the house immediately. To Dylan, he said that he no longer had a son. The young man before him was dead to him. Olivia, realizing the full impact of what was happening, became hysterical. She clutched at Walter's arm, begging him to reconsider, to give her another chance. In her desperation, she said things she knew she could never take back. Cruel words designed to hurt Walter as deeply as he had been hurt. It was at that moment, as Olivia's accusations hung in the air, something in Walter snapped. With a roar of inarticulate rage he lashed out, his hand connecting with Olivia's face with a sickening crack. Olivia stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Dylan, galvanized into action, moved to intervene, but Walter was beyond reason. In a frenzy of violence that seemed to last both an eternity and mere seconds, Walter's hands found Olivia's throat. Dylan tried desperately to pull his father away, shouting for him to stop. But Walter's grip was like iron. By the time he finally released Olivia, it was too late. He crumpled to the floor, her eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. The room fell silent, save for Walter's ragged breathing. Father and son stood over Olivia's motionless body, full horror of what had just occurred slowly sinking in. In the space of a few devastating minutes, their lives had been irrevocably altered, and the peaceful facade of their existence in Tarrytown had been shattered beyond repair. In the immediate aftermath of Olivia's death, the Daniels house was plunged into a surreal, nightmarish state. Walter, his rage spent, sat slumped in a corner of the bedroom, his eyes vacant, muttering incoherently to himself. Dylan, in shock and disbelief, paced the room, alternating between bouts of hysterical crying and frantic attempts to revive Olivia. It was Dylan who finally broke the paralysis that had gripped them both. With shaking hands, he reached for his phone to call 911. As he dialed, the reality of what he was about to do hit him. He was about to turn his own father in for murder. The sleepy town of Tarrytown, unaccustomed to such violence, was soon buzzing with activity. Police cars and an ambulance, their lights painting the snow-covered street in alternating red and blue, drew curious neighbors from their homes. Walter offered no resistance as he was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror. Dylan, questioned separately, found himself struggling to piece together a coherent account of what had happened. The truth seemed too horrific, too unbelievable to put into words. As news of the tragedy spread, the tight-knit community of Tarrytown reacted with disbelief and sorrow. Walter Daniels, the respected former principal, arrested for the murder of his wife Olivia, friendly librarian who always had a kind word for everyone, dead, and young Dylan Carter, now orphaned in the most terrible way imaginable. In the days that followed, as the police investigation unfolded, more details came to light. Rumors began to circulate about the true nature of Olivia and Dylan's relationship. Some defended them, arguing that love knew no boundaries. Others condemned them, seeing their actions as a betrayal of family values. The Daniels house, once a symbol of respectability, now stood empty and forlorn, yellow police tape fluttering in the winter wind, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its wall. As winter gave way to spring, the case against Walter Daniels moved forward. His lawyer, citing temporary insanity brought on by extreme emotional distress, prepared for what promised to be a sensational trial. The prosecution, armed with Dylan's reluctant testimony and physical evidence from the scene, was confident in their case. Carytown, shaken to its core by the events in the Daniels house, would never be quite the same. The tragedy served as a stark reminder that even in the most idyllic of settings, darkness could lurk just beneath the surface. As the investigation into Olivia's death deepened, investigators began to piece together the complex web of events that had led to that fateful day. Interviews with neighbors, analysis of phone records, and a thorough examination of the Daniels home painted a picture of a family in turmoil, their respectable facade hiding dark secret. One of the key pieces of evidence came from Olivia's personal diary, discovered hidden in a locked drawer of her writing desk. The journal detailed the progression of her obsession with Dylan, from innocent attraction to a full-blown affair. The entries revealed a woman torn between guilt and desire, aware of the wrongness of her actions but unable to stop herself. Dylan's art studio in the garage proved to be another treasure trove of information. Investigators discovered a series of paintings and sketches that, while not explicitly incriminating, hinted at the illicit relationship. One particularly striking piece depicted an older woman's hands intertwined with those of a younger man, set against a background of stormy skies. Dylan, still in seclusion, was portrayed alternately as a victim of manipulation and a homewrecker who had destroyed his family. His aunt fended off constant requests for interviews, issuing only a brief statement asking for privacy during this difficult time. Over the course of 2 weeks, the prosecution laid out their case, painting a picture of a man driven to violence by jealousy and betrayal. Dylan, appearing gaunt and haunted, took the stand to testify against his father, his voice barely above a whisper, as he recounted the events leading up to his stepmother's death. Walter's defense team argued for a charge of manslaughter, citing the extreme emotional distress their client had been under. Character witnesses spoke of Walter's previous good standing in the community, his dedication as an educator, and his reputation as a loving husband and father. In the end, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. As the judge announced the sentence, 25 years to life, a collective gasp rose from the courtroom. Walter, his face a mask of resignation, was led away in handcuffs. Dylan, unable to watch, slipped out of the courtroom, leaving behind the town that had been his home and the tragedy that had defined his young life. Nathan Langford, a successful chief financial officer for a prominent tech firm in Austin, Texas, and his wife, Vanessa Langford, a talented fashion designer, were the picture of marital bliss to their friends and neighbors. Their home, with its manicured lawn and modern architectural design, stood as a testament to their seemingly perfect life. However, beneath the surface, a dark current was stirring. Nathan's growing fascination with a taboo fantasy would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their idyllic existence and end in tragedy. What began as a consensual exploration of desires would spiral into a maelstrom of jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately, murder. Nathan Langford was born in 1983 to a middle-class family in San Antonio. From an early age, he displayed a keen intellect and a fascination with finance and numbers. His parents, both educators, nurtured his interests, and by the time he entered high school, Nathan was already mastering complex financial concepts. Despite his academic prowess, he struggled socially, often feeling awkward and out of place among his peers. Vanessa Langford, born in 1985, grew up in a wealthy family in Houston, Texas. The youngest of 3 children, she was vivacious and creative from the start. Her parents, successful real estate developers, provided her with every opportunity, including art classes and fashion design courses. Their paths crossed in 2003 at the University of Texas at Austin, where Nathan, a junior majoring in finance, literally bumped into Vanessa, a freshman studying fashion design in the campus library. He was immediately smitten by her radiant smile and effortless charm. Vanessa, in turn, found herself drawn to Nathan's quiet intensity and brilliant mind. Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discussions, late-night study sessions where Vanessa would sketch designs while Nathan analyzed financial models, and explorations of Austin's eclectic music scene. Despite their different backgrounds and personalities, they found in each other perfect complement. They married in 2007, shortly after Vanessa's graduation. The wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard in the Texas Hill Country, was a joyous affair, seemed to portend a bright future. Nathan had already secured a high-paying job at a tech firm in Austin, while Vanessa began to make a name for herself in the city's competitive fashion scene. For the first few years of their marriage, life seemed perfect. They bought their dream home in a trendy Austin neighborhood, traveled the world, and built a wide circle of friends. Nathan's career soared as he climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming the CFO of a major tech company. Vanessa's fashion business flourished. Her designs featured in several magazines. From the outside, the Langfords appeared to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a strong, loving marriage. But as they entered their 30s, subtle cracks began to form in their seemingly flawless facade, setting the stage for the tumultuous events to come. As the Langfords approached their 10th wedding anniversary, a restlessness began to creep into their relationship. Passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable but sometimes monotonous glow. Nathan, always introspective, found himself increasingly drawn to online forums and discussions about alternative lifestyles. It started innocently enough, curiosity about what other couples did to spice up their love life. But as Nathan delved deeper into these virtual communities, he became particularly fascinated by the concept of cuckold. The idea of watching his wife with another man, being a voyeur to her pleasure, awakened something within him. First, Nathan kept these thoughts to himself, ashamed and confused by the intensity of his desires. He would stay up late, ostensibly working, but in reality, he was consuming every piece of cuckold-related content he could find. Vanessa, perceptive as ever, sensed the change in her husband. She noticed his distraction, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over during their conversation, and the increased frequency of his late nights at the computer. Concerned, she gently probed, asking if everything was all right. Work was becoming too stressful. Finally, after weeks of internal struggle, Nathan decided to broach the subject with Vanessa one evening. Over a bottle of wine, he haltingly confessed his newfound interest, speaking of his desires and his curiosity about exploring this fantasy, all the while watching Vanessa's face for signs of disgust or rejection. To his surprise and relief, Vanessa didn't recoil. Instead, she listened with an open mind, asking thoughtful questions about what exactly appealed to him about this scenario. While she expressed initial reservations, she also admitted to a certain intrigue. The idea of being desired by another man, being the center of attention, held its own allure. This conversation marked a turning point in their marriage. What had been a private fantasy for Nathan was now out in the open, a possibility to be explored together. Neither of them could have predicted the profound impact this revelation would have on their lives, or the dangerous path it would ultimately lead them down. The Langfords' foray into the world of cuckolding began cautiously. They set ground rules, discussed boundaries, and agreed to take things slowly. But finding the right person to introduce into their marriage proved challenging. They wanted someone attractive and charismatic, but also discreet and respectful of their arrangement. Enter Dominic Wren. Vanessa met him at a charity gala in downtown Austin. Tall, with piercing green eyes, Dominic exuded a magnetic charm that drew people to him. As the owner of a successful luxury car dealership, he moved effortlessly through Austin's elite circle, his wit and knowledge making him the center of attention at any gathering. Vanessa was immediately drawn to Dominic's sophisticated aura. They spent the evening in animated conversation about the latest trends in fashion and the luxury car market. When Dominic casually mentioned being unattached and open to new experiences, Vanessa felt a spark of excitement. She relayed her encounter to Nathan that night, watching his eyes light up as she described Dominic. They agreed that he might be the perfect candidate for their exploration. Nathan encouraged Vanessa to nurture the connection, his excitement palpable. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa and Dominic met for coffee several times, ostensibly to discuss potential collaborations between his dealership and her fashion brand. Each time, Vanessa returned home to regale Nathan with stories of their encounters, stoking the flames of his fantasy. Finally, after a particularly flirtatious meeting, Vanessa decided it was time to broach the subject with Dominic. To her surprise and delight, he was intrigued by the proposition. He admitted to having participated in similar arrangements before and understood the delicacy required. With Dominic on board, the stage was set for the Langfords to turn fantasy into reality. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would irrevocably change their lives. The night of the first encounter arrived with a mix of nervous energy and excited anticipation. Nathan and Vanessa had spent weeks planning every detail, from the ambient lighting in their bedroom to the bottle of expensive champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Dominic arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, looking dashing in a tailored charcoal suit. He brought with him a bouquet of exotic flowers for Vanessa and a rare bottle of scotch for Nathan, a gesture that impressed them both with its thoughtfulness. The evening began in the living room with drinks and light conversation. Dominic regaled them with stories from the luxury car world, his charisma on full display. Vanessa, dressed in a slinky black dress, laughed at his jokes and touched his arm with increasing frequency. Nathan watched from his armchair, a tumbler of scotch in hand, his heart racing with every interaction between his wife and their guest. As the night progressed and the alcohol flowed, the atmosphere grew charged with sexual tension. Finally, with a meaningful look at Nathan, Vanessa took Dominic by the hand and led him upstairs to the bedroom. Nathan settled into a corner armchair as Vanessa and Dominic began to kiss passionately. When Dominic and Vanessa finally fell onto the bed, their bodies entwined, Nathan felt a potent mix of arousal and an unexpected twinge of jealousy. The encounter itself was intense and passionate. Nathan watched, transfixed as his fantasy played out before his eyes. The reality was more visceral, more overwhelming than he had imagined. Afterward, as they all lay spent and silent, Nathan felt a complex swirl of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. His long-held fantasy had been realized, but there was also a nagging sense of unease, feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Dominic left shortly after, with promises to stay in touch. As Nathan and Vanessa lay in bed, discussing the evening's events in hushed, excited tones, neither could have predicted how this first encounter would set the stage for the tragedy to come. They had opened Pandora's box, and there would be no closing it again. Encouraged by the success of their first foray into cuckolding, they eagerly arranged more meetings with Dominic. What had started as a monthly indulgence quickly became a weekly affair. Each encounter seemed to push the boundaries further, with Dominic staying longer and the sessions growing more intense and intimate. Nathan's role began to evolve as well. Initially content to watch from afar, he found himself drawn closer to the action, sometimes even joining in. The dynamics of power and control within their bedroom became increasingly complex. Outside of their encounters, Dominic began to integrate more into their lives. He would join them for dinner, accompany Vanessa to fashion shows, even spend weekends at their home. His charm and wit made him a delightful companion, and the Langfords found themselves enjoying his company, even when intimacy wasn't on the agenda. As spring turned to summer, Nathan's initial excitement began to give way to a gnawing sense of discomfort. He started to notice small but significant changes in Vanessa's behavior. She seemed distracted during their alone time, her mind elsewhere. She began to dress up more often, even on days when they had no plans with Dominic. One evening, Nathan came home early from work to find Vanessa on the phone, speaking in hushed, intimate tones. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call, claiming it was just a client. But Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that she had been talking to Dominic. In bed, Vanessa's passion seemed to have cooled. She was still enthusiastic during their encounters with Dominic, but alone with Nathan, she often seemed tired or disinterested. Nathan found himself initiating intimacy more often, only to be gently rebuffed. Nathan tried to reassert control over the situation. He suggested taking a break from their arrangement, perhaps going on a vacation just the two of them, but Vanessa seemed reluctant, always finding reasons to delay or change the subject. His work began to suffer, as he spent hours analyzing every interaction, every text message, every glance between Vanessa and Dominic. He started checking Vanessa's phone when she wasn't looking, scrutinizing her social media activity, even contemplating following her when she went out alone. Nathan knew he was spiraling. He felt powerless to stop it. The game he had initiated was slipping out of his control, and he was terrified of losing Vanessa. As his anxiety grew, so did his determination to put an end to the situation he had created, by any means necessary. The breaking point came on a warm July evening. Nathan had planned a romantic dinner at home, hoping to reconnect with Vanessa and discuss his growing concerns. He had left work early, bought her favorite wine, spent hours preparing an elaborate meal. But as the sun began to set and the candles burned low, Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours ticked by, the carefully prepared food growing cold on the table. When she finally stumbled in shortly before midnight, her hair disheveled and lipstick smudged, Nathan's worst fears seemed confirmed. The argument that ensued was explosive. Nathan, his emotions amplified by alcohol and hours of anxious waiting, unleashed all the fears and suspicions he'd been harboring. He accused Vanessa of falling in love with Dominic, of making a fool of him, destroying their marriage. Vanessa, caught off guard and defensive, initially tried to deflect. She claimed she'd lost track of time at a client meeting, that her phone had died. But faced with Nathan's relentless questioning and the evidence of her appearance, she finally broke down and admitted she had been with Dominic. The confession hit Nathan like a physical blow. He had suspected, feared, but hearing it confirmed shattered something inside. In that moment, all the excitement and thrill of their arrangement evaporated, leaving only a deep sense of betrayal and anger. Vanessa, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain. She insisted she loved Nathan, but Dominic made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She was confused, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her deepening emotions for Dominic. Nathan, his voice low and dangerous, demanded that she end things with Dominic immediately. Vanessa, her own anger rising, refused. This had been Nathan's idea in the first place, she argued. Couldn't dictate her feelings or control her relationships. The argument escalated, with both of them saying hurtful things they would later regret. In a moment of rage, Nathan smashed a wine glass against the wall. Vanessa, shocked by this uncharacteristic display of violence, retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind her. Nathan spent the night on the couch, his mind racing, unable to sleep. In the days following their confrontation, a chilling calm settled over the Langford household. Vanessa and Nathan moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking, tension palpable. Vanessa spent most of her time out of the house, throwing herself into her work, and Nathan suspected, meeting with Dominic. Nathan, for his part, retreated into a dark place within himself, called in sick to work, spending his days in a haze of alcohol and paranoid thoughts. He scoured Vanessa's computer and phone for evidence of her relationship with Dominic, meticulously documenting every text, every call, every unexplained absence. Nathan began to fantasize about confronting Dominic, about making him pay for destroying his marriage. First, these were just harmless daydreams, a way to vent his frustration. But as the days wore on and Vanessa grew more distant, these fantasies took on a darker, more violent tone. One afternoon, while Vanessa was at a client meeting, Nathan found himself in their garage, holding the heavy wrench he used for home repairs. As he felt its weight in his hand, chilling thought crossed his mind. It would be so easy to end this, to eliminate the threat to his marriage once and for all. Horrified by the direction of his thoughts, Nathan dropped the wrench and fled the garage. The seed had been planted. As he paced the house, gulping down glasses of whiskey, the idea took root and grew. By the time night fell, what had started as a fleeting, horrifying thought crystallized into a plan. August 15th dawned hot and humid, with the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Nathan woke early, his head pounding from another night of heavy drinking, but his resolve unwavering. Today would be the day he confronted Dominic, the day he reclaimed control over his life and his marriage. He spent the morning in a feverish state of preparation. He showered, shaved, and dressed with meticulous care, as if preparing for an important business meeting, rather than the violent confrontation he was planning. In the garage, he selected the wrench he had held days earlier, wrapping it in a towel and placing it in a nondescript gym bag. Vanessa left for work around 9 a.m., barely acknowledging Nathan as she rushed out the door. As soon as she was gone, Nathan got into his car and drove to Dominic's dealership. Parked across the street, watching as Dominic arrived, greeting his employees with his characteristic charm. For hours, Nathan sat in his car, the sun beating down on him, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he watched Dominic go about his day. As closing time approached, Nathan watched Dominic bid goodbye to his last customer and begin closing up the dealership. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With shaking hands, Nathan grabbed the gym bag and crossed the street. Dominic was locking the dealership door when Nathan approached. He turned, surprise flickering across his face, for it settled into a wary smile. "Nathan," Dominic said, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Nathan felt a surge of rage at Dominic's casual tone, as if he hadn't been destroying Nathan's life for months. Without conscious thought, he swung the gym bag, catching Dominic off guard and sending him stumbling back against the dealership door. What followed was a blur of violence and desperation. Nathan pulled out the wrench, swinging it wildly as Dominic tried to defend himself. Nathan was beyond reason. Every blow was fueled by months of jealousy, insecurity, and rage. When it was over, Nathan stood panting over Dominic's motionless body, the wrench slick with blood in his trembling hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just killed a man. He had just destroyed his own life in a futile attempt to save it. Nathan went through the motions of covering his tracks. He dragged Dominic's body into the alley behind the dealership, hiding it behind a dumpster. He wiped down the door handle and any surfaces he might have touched. Then, still in a state of shock, he drove home, the weight of his actions settling over him like a shroud. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Nathan pulled into his driveway, the rain washing away the blood on his hands, but doing nothing to cleanse his conscience. The hours following the murder passed in a nightmarish blur for Nathan. He stumbled into the house, barely making it to the bathroom before violently emptying the contents of his stomach. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of his actions hit him. He had killed a man. He was a murderer. Operating on autopilot, Nathan set about destroying evidence. He burned his clothes in the backyard fire pit, scrubbed the car clean, and took a shower. When Vanessa came home, Nathan had composed himself enough to feign normalcy. He greeted her with forced cheerfulness, suggesting they order takeout and watch a movie. As they sat on the couch, the TV flickering unwatched, Nathan's mind raced. He knew it was only a matter of time before Dominic's body was discovered. He needed an alibi, a story to tell when the inevitable questions came. He casually mentioned to Vanessa that he had spent the day at home, catching up on work and doing some yard work. He even showed her a small cut on his hand, claiming he had nicked himself while pruning the rose bushes, cut that had actually come from his struggle with Dominic. 2 days after the murder, the news broke. Dominic Wren, prominent luxury car dealer and fixture of Austin's elite circles, had been found dead behind his dealership. The police were treating it as a homicide. Nathan learned of the discovery while at work, overhearing colleagues discussing the shocking news. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands shaking so badly he had to excuse himself to the restroom. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Carla Mendoza, a veteran of the Austin Police Department's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She and her team combed through Dominic's life, interviewing friends, family, and business associates. It didn't take long for them to uncover Dominic's relationship with the Langfords. Vanessa, devastated by the news of Dominic's death, initially tried to downplay their connection. Faced with evidence from Dominic's phone records and witness accounts, she eventually admitted to their affair. When the police came to interview Nathan, he was prepared. He expressed shock and sadness at Dominic's death, acknowledging that while their arrangement had been unconventional, he had considered Dominic a friend. He calmly recounted his movements on the day of the murder, his story aligning perfectly with what he had told Vanessa. Detective Mendoza, however, sensed something off about Nathan's demeanor. His calm seemed forced, his grief a touch too performative. She made a mental note to dig deeper into his background and movements. As the investigation progressed, the police began to piece together a timeline of Dominic's last day. Security footage from nearby businesses showed him entering the dealership in the morning, but never leaving. His last phone call had been to Vanessa, ending abruptly around closing time. The net was slowly closing around Nathan. As the days turned into weeks, Vanessa's grief over Dominic's death deepened. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the office, avoiding the stilted silences that now characterized her home life with Nathan. At first, Nathan's attentiveness in the wake of the tragedy had touched her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, always ready with a comforting word or a shoulder to cry on. But as time passed, she began to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. Vanessa found herself revisiting the events leading up to Dominic's death. She remembered Nathan's jealousy, his desperate pleas for her to end the affair. The more she thought about it, the more a terrible suspicion began to take root in her mind. She started paying closer attention to Nathan's actions, noting when he left the house, checking his browser history when he wasn't around. She even considered hiring a private investigator, couldn't bring herself to take that final step. As her suspicions grew, so did her fear. If Nathan was capable of what she was beginning to suspect, what else might he be capable? For the first time in their marriage, Vanessa found herself afraid of her husband, unsure of the man she had promised to love for better or worse. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A homeless man known to frequent the alley behind Dominic's dealership came forward with information. He claimed to have seen a man matching Nathan's description entering the alley on the night of the murder, carrying a gym bag. This new lead energized the investigation. Detective Mendoza and her team began to scrutinize Nathan's movements more closely. They discovered traffic camera footage that contradicted his alibi, showing his car near the dealership around the time of the murder. As the evidence mounted, Nathan's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily, snapping at colleagues, and becoming paranoid about being followed. Vanessa, her own suspicions now seeming confirmed, began to distance herself from him, staying with a friend under the guise of needing space to grieve. Final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the police, armed with a search warrant, found small traces of blood in Nathan's car that matched Dominic's DNA. They also discovered the murder weapon, the blood-stained wrench, that Nathan had hidden in the attic, unable to bring himself to dispose of it completely. On a rainy September morning, nearly a month after Dominic's death, Detective Mendoza arrived at the Langford residence with a team of officers. They found Nathan sitting in the living room, half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. As the detective read him his rights, Nathan offered no resistance. In that moment, he felt an odd sense of relief. The game was over. The lies, the fear, the constant vigilance could all stop now. Nathan Langford's trial was brief but sensational. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, his confession a rambling account of jealousy, fantasy, and fatal obsession. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Vanessa, shattered by the revelation of her husband's actions, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She sold their house, unable to live with the memories it held, and moved out of state to start a new life. Martin Townsend, flourishing entrepreneur, his wife Ella, a devoted homemaker, and Ella's daughter from a previous marriage, Nora, resided in a magnificent home in Naples, Florida. Their neighbors viewed them as the quintessential family, wealthy, attractive, and ostensibly content. Yet beneath their well-manicured exteriors of lush lawns and upscale gatherings, dark currents were poised to drag the Townsends into a maelstrom of forbidden desires, betrayal, and ultimately, catastrophic violence. This tale of deception began as a typical story of marital dissatisfaction, but soon spiraled into a shocking saga of a taboo romance between stepfather and stepdaughter, climaxing in a confrontation that twisted their destinies and left multiple lives in ruins. Martin and Ella Townsend's love story commenced, as many do, with a serendipitous encounter at a charity gala in Naples in the spring of 2010. Martin, then 35, was a rising star in the finance world, renowned for his keen intellect and charismatic demeanor. Ella, aged 32 at the time, was a divorcee working as an interior designer for affluent clients, seeking stability and prosperity after a turbulent first marriage. Their whirlwind romance quickly became the talk of their social circle. Martin was enchanted by Ella's elegance and intelligence, while Ella saw in Martin the security and accomplishment she longed for after her rocky first marriage. Within 6 months, Martin had proposed, presenting Ella with an exquisite diamond ring, soon became the envy of all their friends. The wedding, held at the illustrious Naples Beach Hotel, was the social highlight of the season. Ella's 7-year-old daughter Nora was the flower girl, her face alight with joy as she watched her mother marry the man who would become her stepfather. Initially, the Townsends seemed to flourish. Martin's career trajectory rocketed upwards as he was made a partner at his firm, while Ella fully embraced her role as the consummate corporate wife, organizing events that solidified their elite social standing. She lavished Nora with attention, ensuring the girl wanted for nothing, from the finest schools, the lavish vacation. However, as the novelty of their new life together waned, cracks began to show. Martin's relentless work schedule and frequent business trips left Ella feeling abandoned. She had sacrificed her career to support his, and now found herself isolated in their vast, quiet home. Attempts by Ella to rekindle their romance were met with indifference from Martin, who appeared more interested in his financial spreadsheets than in his wife. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, dwindled to cold exchanges about household logistics and Nora's schooling. By the time Nora entered high school, Townsend's marriage was largely for appearance. They even slept in separate bedrooms, attributing it to Martin's alleged snoring when queried by their friends. Their interactions became formal and distant, more akin to business partners than spouses. Ella threw herself into volunteer work and mothering Nora, vicariously living through her daughter's accomplishments and social engagement. Martin, meanwhile, buried himself deeper in his work, taking on more responsibilities at the firm and spending even less time at home. Neither was willing to confront the possibility of divorce. Their shared dread of scandal, comfort of their lifestyle, and concern for how it would affect Nora kept them trapped in their loveless marriage. Unknown to them, their carefully maintained facade was on the verge of collapse in the most dramatic and tragic manner. As Nora blossomed into a striking young woman, now 18 and preparing for college, she inherited her mother's grace and her biological father's spirited personality. While Nora's relationship with her mother remained close, albeit occasionally strained by Ella's overprotectiveness, Her relationship with Martin had always been complex. Initially, Martin had been a caring stepfather, involved in her school activities and helping with homework. But as his marriage to Ella cooled, so did his interactions with Nora. This changed during Nora's senior year of high school, when Martin, possibly confronting his own mortality as he approached 50, began to show a renewed interest in his stepdaughter's life. He attended her dance recitals, beaming with pride, and engaged her in discussions about her college and future career plans. Ella was initially pleased to see Martin integrating more into the family, encouraging their bonding in hopes it might mend the growing rift in their marriage. However, she soon began to notice unsettling changes in how Martin looked at Nora, and how their conversations ceased abruptly. Whenever she entered the room, Nora, for her part, felt increasingly drawn to Martin, confused yet exhilarated by his attention, which made her feel recognized in a way she hadn't before. She began dressing more carefully when he was around, and sought his company under the guise of needing assistance with college applications or financial advice. The tension within the Townsend home escalated, turning family dinners into arenas of unspoken words and fraught exchanges. Ella watched with increasing alarm as her daughter and husband seemed to gravitate towards each other, excluding her completely. As Nora's high school graduation approached, the Townsend home transformed into a ticking time bomb of unvoiced desires and simmering resentment. None of them could have predicted the explosion that was imminent, nor the catastrophic aftermath that would ensue. The delicate balance in the Townsend household started to crumble just weeks before Nora's graduation. One rainy April night, while Ella was out of town for a charity event, left Martin and Nora alone at home. They settled in to watch a movie, a bottle of wine between them. Martin reasoned that at 18, Nora was mature enough to enjoy a glass or two under his supervision. As the wine flowed and the storm intensified outside, their inhibitions began to lower. Emboldened by the alcohol and the charged atmosphere, Nora confessed to Martin that she had always found him attractive. Martin, his judgment clouded by loneliness and wine, responded not with the fatherly dismissal he should have, but with a confession of his own burgeoning feeling. One touch led to another, and soon they found themselves entangled on the sofa, their years of suppressed attraction erupting into a passionate encounter. The next morning brought with it shame, confusion, and the thrill of forbidden fruit they had tasted. Both Martin and Nora swore it would never happen again, that it was a mistake born of loneliness and wine. But the dam had broken, and the flood of desire was not so easily contained. Stolen glances became stolen kisses. Furtive touches beneath the dinner table, covert messages arranging clandestine meetings. They justified their actions to themselves and each other. Martin wasn't Nora's real father, they reasoned. Ella had been cold and distant for years. They were both consenting adults. Love, they told each other, couldn't be wrong. But the guilt gnawed at them, especially at Nora. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the growing suspicion. She knew the devastating impact this would have if discovered, yet she couldn't bring herself to end it, addicted to the rush of their forbidden romance. Martin compartmentalized, as he did with all aspects of his life. With Ella, he played the role of the distant but dutiful husband. With his colleagues, he was the consummate professional. But in those stolen moments with Nora, he allowed himself to feel a passion he thought he had lost forever. Their trysts became more frequent and daring as the weeks passed. Rendezvous at a motel on the outskirts of Naples, under the guise of college tours, heated encounters in Martin's car parked in secluded spots. Each time they swore it would be the last. Each time they found themselves drawn back together, powerless against the pull of their illicit desire. As spring turned to summer, the web of lies they had woven began to tangle, threatening to ensnare them all. As Nora's freshman year of college approached, the affair between her and Martin intensified. The impending separation seemed to fuel their passion, each encounter tinged with a desperate urgency. They began taking greater risks, their need for each other overriding their caution. Martin started finding excuses to visit Nora at her college campus, a mere 2-hour drive away. He would claim business meetings in the area, when in reality, he was spending long, luxurious afternoons tangled in the sheets of Nora's dorm room. Nora, for her part, invented study groups and extracurricular activities to explain her frequent trips home on weekends. Their behavior began to impact their relationships with others. Martin grew even more distant from Ella, barely able to look at her without feeling a stab of guilt. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as both an escape and an excuse for his absences. Nora struggled to connect with her college peers, always holding back, always guarding her explosive secret. The affair also began to change them as individuals. Martin, reinvigorated by his relationship with Nora, started paying more attention to his appearance. He joined a gym, updated his wardrobe, even contemplated hair restoration treatment. His colleagues remarked on his newfound energy, assuming he had finally found work-life balance. Nora, meanwhile, found herself torn between exhilaration and shame. She excelled in her studies, channeling her turbulent emotions into her coursework, but her social life suffered. She rebuffed advances from classmates, unable to contemplate a normal relationship while entangled with her stepfather. There were close calls that should have served as wake-up calls. Once, Ella nearly walked in on them in a compromising position in the pool house, saved only by a well-timed phone call that delayed her arrival home. Another time, one of Nora's dorm mates spotted Martin leaving her room early in the morning, leading to awkward questions that Nora clumsily deflected. Despite these near misses, Martin and Nora convinced themselves they could maintain their secret indefinitely. They began making tentative plans for a future together, whispering about the day when they could finally be open about their love. Martin spoke of divorcing Ella, of starting a new life with Nora once she finished college. Nora daydreamed about a fairy tale wedding, conveniently ignoring the devastation it would wreak on her mother. But as their fantasy future grew more elaborate, so did the tangled web of lies required to sustain their present. Martin's finances came under scrutiny at home, as Ella questioned the increased business expenses and mysterious cash withdrawals. Nora's academic performance, while still strong, began to slip as the stress of her double life took its toll. Pressure began to mount, cracks in their carefully constructed facade widening day by day. Still, they persisted, each stolen moment together, reinforcing their belief that their love was worth any cost. They failed to see that the price would be far higher than either of them could have imagined, and that the bill was coming due far sooner than they knew. It was during a lunch with her friend Beatrice that the first inkling of the terrible truth began to form in Ella's mind. Beatrice, ever the gossip, mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen Martin and Nora having an intense conversation at a cafe in town, at a time when Nora was supposed to be at college and Martin at work. The way Beatrice described their body language, leaning in close, hands touching on the table, sent a chill down Ella's spine. She laughed it off too loudly and changed the subject. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. From that moment on, Ella began to pay closer attention to the interactions between her husband and daughter. She noticed the lingering glances, the inside jokes she wasn't privy to, the way they always seemed to find reasons to be alone together. As the evidence mounted, Ella found herself trapped in a state of denial. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate. Yet, with each passing day, the truth she didn't want to face inched closer to the surface, threatening to explode into the open and shatter their lives forever. The day Ella's world imploded started like any other. It was a warm June morning, the air heavy with the promise of summer storms. Ella had plans to meet friends for lunch, but a last-minute cancellation left her with an unexpected free afternoon. On a whim, she decided to surprise Martin at his office, perhaps suggest an impromptu date night to rekindle their faltering connection. However, Martin wasn't in his office. His assistant, flustered by Ella's unexpected appearance, let slip that Mr. Townsend had left early, mentioning something about a family emergency. Ella's blood ran cold. There was no family emergency she knew of. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and opened the tracking app she had installed weeks ago in a moment of paranoid weakness. The pulsing dot of Martin's location appeared not at home, not at any hospital, but at a nondescript address on the outskirts of Naples. The drive to that address was a blur. Ella moved on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. She pulled up to a small motel, kind that rented rooms by the hour, and there in the parking lot was Martin's car. Ella sat in her vehicle, paralyzed with indecision. Did she really want to know? Couldn't she just drive away, pretend she'd never seen this? But then another car pulled into the lot, Nora's beat-up college Honda. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Ella watched her daughter hurry across the parking lot and knock on one of the motel room doors. It opened, and Martin's familiar silhouette was visible for a moment before Nora slipped inside. Ella sat in stunned silence, her mind refusing to process what her eyes had just witnessed. Seconds stretched into minutes as she stared at the closed motel room door, willing it to be some sort of mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the betrayal it so clearly was. Finally, operating on instinct rather than conscious thought, Ella got out of her car. She raised her hand to knock, then paused, her fist trembling in midair. From inside, she could hear muffled laughter, Nora's musical giggle, Martin's deeper chuckle. The sounds of happiness and intimacy twisted like a knife in her gut. With a deep breath, Ella steeled herself and rapped sharply on the door. The laughter inside abruptly ceased, replaced by hushed, panicked whispers. She knocked again, louder this time, her calm facade cracking as she called out. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before she heard movement inside. The door opened slowly, revealing Martin, his hair mussed and shirt hastily buttoned. Behind him, Ella could see Nora, her face a mask of guilt and fear. In that moment, as Ella looked from her husband to her daughter, the full weight of their betrayal came crashing down upon her. Her world, already fragile, shattered completely. The tension in the small motel room was suffocating as Ella stepped inside, her eyes darting between Martin and Nora. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the pounding of Ella's heart in her ears. Martin was the first to break the silence. His voice strained as he attempted to explain, but Ella cut him off, her voice eerily calm. Martin stepped forward, attempting to shield Nora. "Ella, please, this isn't Nora's fault," pleaded. A harsh laugh escaped Ella's lips as the argument escalated quickly. Years of pent-up resentment and betrayal poured out. Accusations flew back and forth. Ella accused Martin of grooming Nora, of taking advantage of her youth and innocence. Martin defended their relationship, insisting it was real love, that Nora is an adult now. Nora, caught between her mother and the man she thought she loved, tried desperately to mediate. She pleaded with Ella to understand, swore that Martin had never taken advantage of her, that their feelings were mutual. But Ella was beyond reason. In her eyes, this was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her as a wife, but as a mother. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Ella noticed Martin inching towards the bedside table. She saw the glint of metal and realized with a jolt of fear that he was reaching for something. The gun he always kept for protection. Time seemed to slow down. Ella lunged for Martin, determined to stop him from doing something unthinkable. Nora, seeing her mother's sudden movement, misinterpreted it as an attack on Martin and tried to intervene. In the ensuing scuffle, the gun went off. The sound of the shot was deafening in the small room. For a moment, everything went still. Then Nora crumpled to the floor, a red stain blossoming on her shirt. Ella's scream of anguish shattered the silence. Martin stood frozen, the gun slipping from his nerveless fingers as Ella frantically tried to stem the blood flowing from her daughter's wound. The full horror of what had happened began to sink in. Their secret was out, and the consequences were far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. The gunshot at the motel brought a swift response from local law enforcement. Within minutes, the small parking lot was awash in flashing lights as police cars and an ambulance converged on the scene. First responders found a tableau of tragedy in room 114. Nora lay on the floor, barely clinging to life despite Ella's desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. Martin sat slumped in a corner, his eyes vacant. The gun still lay on the floor where he had dropped it. Ella, her hands and clothes covered in her daughter's blood, alternated between frantic pleas to the paramedics and incoherent sobs. Detective Liam Donovan, a veteran of the local police force, took charge of the scene as Nora was rushed to the hospital. Donovan began the grim task of piecing together what had happened in that motel room. The physical evidence was clear enough. One shot fired, one victim, the gun registered to Martin Townsend. But the why of it all was murkier. Initial questioning of Ella and Martin yielded conflicting stories, both too distraught to provide a coherent account of events. As news of the shooting spread, the quiet community was rocked by shock and disbelief. Townsends had always seemed like the perfect family, successful, respected, involved in local charities. The idea that such violence could erupt among them was almost inconceivable to their neighbors and friends. In the days that followed, as Nora fought for her life in the ICU, Detective Donovan and his team worked tirelessly to unravel the truth. They combed through phone records, interviewed friends and colleagues, and dug into the family's background. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a family not nearly as perfect as their polished exterior suggested. As Detective Donovan delved deeper into the Townsend case, the facade of the perfect family crumbled rapidly. Interviews with family, friends, and colleagues painted a picture of a marriage long devoid of love, held together by appearances and financial convenience. Beatrice Whitaker, Ella's closest friend, provided crucial information about Ella's growing suspicions in the months leading up to the shooting. She recounted tearful lunches where Ella had confided her fears about Martin's possible infidelity, never suspecting the true nature of his betrayal. Martin's co-workers described a man who had seemed rejuvenated in recent months, speaking often of a new love in his life. They had assumed he was having a typical midlife crisis affair, never imagining the object of his affection was his own stepdaughter. But it was Nora's college roommate who provided the most damning evidence. Once assured of police confidentiality, Zoe shared a trove of text messages Nora had sent her, detailing the affair with Martin in the sort of giddy, love-struck language typical of a young woman in the throes of what she believed to be true love. The digital trail proved to be a goldmine for investigators. Subpoenaed phone records showed hundreds of calls and messages between Martin and Nora, often at odd hours. Financial records revealed a pattern of expensive gifts from Martin to Nora, jewelry, designer clothes, even a car, all carefully hidden from Ella. There were records of hotel stays and weekend getaways, disguised as business trips or college visits. As the evidence mounted, full extent of Martin and Nora's deception became clear. This was no sudden passion, no momentary lapse in judgment. Their affair had been ongoing for over a year, meticulously planned and hidden from Ella and the world. The revelation of the affair shed new light on the events in the motel room. What had first appeared to be a case of accidental discharge during a heated argument now looked more like a potential crime of passion. As Nora slowly recovered in the hospital, the question on everyone's mind was who had really pulled the trigger. Was it Martin attempting to silence Nora to save himself, Ella in a fit of rage at their betrayal, or Nora herself, overcome with guilt and shame when confronted by her mother? Truth, Detective Donovan suspected, might be more complex than any of them had initially thought. The district attorney took personal charge of the case. After reviewing the evidence gathered by Detective Donovan and his team, she made the decision to charge both Martin and Ella Townsend with attempted murder. Martin, once the picture of corporate success, appeared haggard and defeated in his orange jumpsuit. His defense team, led by high-powered attorney Xavier Brockton, argued that the shooting had been a tragic accident, the result of a struggle for the gun during a heated family argument. Ella, by contrast, seemed to have aged years in the week since the incident. Her lawyer painted her as a victim, a woman betrayed by her husband and daughter who had acted in self-defense when she believed Martin was reaching for the gun to silence them. Both the question of Nora's role in the incident loomed large over the proceedings. As the only witness to the shooting, besides her parents, her testimony would be crucial. However, Nora, still recovering from her injuries, had so far invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify against either parent. In the end, Martin Townsend accepted a plea deal. In a hushed courtroom, he pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, receiving a sentence of 10 years in prison. As he was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Ella one last time, a look that spoke volumes about the pain, betrayal, and regret that had torn their family apart. Charges against Ella were dropped. She left the courthouse a free woman, but one irrevocably changed by the ordeal. Within months, she had sold the family home and moved out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the whispers and sidelong glances. Nora, once she recovered from her physical wounds, faced the daunting task of healing her emotional and psychological scars. She withdrew from college, entering intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of the shooting and the complicated emotions surrounding her relationship with Martin. Her relationship with Ella remained strained. Breach of trust between mother and daughter, chasm not easily bridged. The Townsend case faded from the national spotlight, but its impact lingered. It served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most picture-perfect family can harbor dark secrets. Community, shaken by the violence that had erupted in their midst, began initiatives to address domestic violence and promote healthier family dynamics. As life slowly returned to normal, the echoes of the Townsend tragedy continued to reverberate, a sobering reminder of the fragility of the facades people build and the hidden depths of the human heart.
It began as a whirlwind romance, the kind that seemed almost too good to be true for Brandon and Natalie. Life had unfolded like a perfect dream, a chance encounter, an instant connection, and the kind of deep, soulful bond that many people spend their entire lives searching for. Brandon Foster, a 30-year-old software engineer with a sharp mind and calm demeanor, had been working tirelessly on his career for years. Love had always seemed elusive to him, a concept more suited to fairy tales and movies than to his own reality. That was until Natalie Morgan appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. She was unlike anyone Brandon had ever met. She was beautiful, confident, and intelligent, with a wit that left him in awe from the moment they met. They shared interests, a similar sense of humor, and a love for adventure that had them traveling together almost as soon as they started dating. Their connection felt effortless, and within 6 months, Brandon was on one knee, proposing to Natalie on a mountaintop during one of their hiking trips. She said yes, her smile radiating warmth as she accepted the ring. Their wedding, a modest but elegant affair, followed soon after. Close family and friends attended, and it was everything Brandon could have hoped for. The vows, the first dance, the promises of a lifetime spent together. He was blissfully in love, content in the belief that he had found the one person he could truly share his life with. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect relationship, there was a secret, one that Natalie had kept hidden from Brandon for as long as they had known each other. A secret that, once revealed, would shatter everything. The first few weeks of their marriage were blissful. Brandon and Natalie had moved into a charming suburban home in Naperville, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. It was small but cozy, with enough space for the two of them to start a family someday. Brandon loved coming home from work to find Natalie in the kitchen preparing dinner, her soft laughter filling the air as they talked about their day. They spent their evenings curled up on the couch, watching movies or discussing their future. Brandon couldn't imagine being happier. But as time went on, Brandon began to notice subtle changes in Natalie's behavior. She seemed more distant at times, as though something was weighing heavily on her mind. There were moments when she would retreat into herself, her laughter fading, her gaze turning somber. When Brandon asked her what was wrong, she would always brush it off, assuring him that everything was fine. But her reassurances did little to ease his growing concern. Brandon loved Natalie with all his heart, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was keeping something from him. He tried to push the thoughts aside, telling himself that every marriage had its ups and downs. After all, they had only been married for a few months. They were still adjusting to life together, still learning how to navigate the complexities of sharing a home and building a future. But the nagging sense that something wasn't right lingered in the back of his mind. It was a rainy afternoon when Brandon's world came crashing down. He had come home from work early, hoping to surprise Natalie with flowers and a romantic evening. As he walked through the front door, he noticed the house was unusually quiet. He called out her name, but received no response. Assuming she was out running errands, he made his way upstairs to their bedroom. As he entered the room, he spotted Natalie's laptop sitting open on the bed. A wave of curiosity washed over him. Natalie had always been very private about her personal devices, never leaving them unlocked or unattended. Brandon hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the bed and glanced at the screen. What he saw made his heart stop. There on the screen was an email conversation between Natalie and a close friend of hers, Samantha Davis, one that Brandon had never met. The messages were long and deeply personal, filled with words that Brandon had never heard from Natalie before. And then there it was, the secret that would change everything. In one of the messages, Natalie had confided in her friend about her past. She had been born male and had transitioned years before meeting Brandon. The conversation detailed her fears about Brandon finding out and how she had planned to tell him eventually, but the right moment had never come. Brandon stared at the screen, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he was reading. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him, leaving him suspended in a state of shock. How could this be possible? How could Natalie have kept something so important from him? He felt a wave of anger rising within him. Anger at the deception, anger at the lies. But beneath the anger, there was also a deep sense of betrayal. That evening, when Natalie returned home, Brandon was waiting for her in the living room. His mind was racing, his emotions a volatile mix of confusion, hurt, and anger. He hadn't said a word to her since she walked through the door, but the tension in the air was palpable. Natalie immediately sensed that something was wrong. She set down her bag and approached him cautiously. "Brandon, is everything okay?" she asked softly. Brandon didn't answer at first. He stood up from the couch, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "I know." Natalie's face went pale. What do you mean?" "I know everything," Brandon said, his voice rising. "I saw the emails, Natalie. I know about your past. Why didn't you tell me?" Natalie's eyes filled with tears as she realized what had happened. She tried to reach out to him, but Brandon recoiled, his anger boiling over. "How could you lie to me like this?" he shouted. "How could you keep something like this from me? I thought I knew you." "I wanted to tell you," Natalie said, her voice trembling. "I just didn't know how. I was scared, Brandon. I was scared you wouldn't love me if you knew the truth. How could you marry me without telling me? How could you let me fall in love with you, knowing that you were keeping this from me?" Brandon asked, tears of his own starting to form. "I didn't want to hurt you. I love you, Brandon. I love you more than anything," Natalie pleaded. But Brandon couldn't hear her. All he could think about was the betrayal, the deception that had been at the heart of their relationship. He stormed out of the house, leaving Natalie standing alone in the living room, her heart breaking as she watched him walk away. In the days that followed, Brandon didn't return home. He couldn't bear to face Natalie, couldn't bear the thought of looking her in the eyes after what he had discovered. He stayed with his friend Michael Reynolds, drowning his sorrows in alcohol and sleepless nights. His mind was consumed by the revelation, by the questions that plagued him at every turn. Had their entire relationship been a lie? Did Natalie ever truly love him, or had she only been using him to hide her secret? Natalie was left alone in their home, devastated by the fallout of their confrontation. She had always known there was a risk in not telling Brandon sooner, but she had never imagined it would end like this. She loved him deeply, but now it seemed as though that love had been twisted into something unrecognizable. She tried reaching out to Brandon, calling and texting him in the hopes that they could talk things through, but each time her messages went unanswered. It was a week later when Brandon finally returned home. He was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from days of drinking and sleeplessness. He had spent the past few days wrestling with his emotions, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But as he walked through the front door, he realized that there were no easy answers. Natalie was sitting at the kitchen table when he entered, her face pale and drawn. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Brandon," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." Brandon stood in the doorway, his hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to scream, to shout, to make her understand the depth of his pain. But all he could do was stare at her, the woman he had once loved so completely, and feel the weight of the betrayal between them. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Brandon said finally, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way." Natalie's heart shattered at his words, but she knew that he had every right to feel the way he did. She had lied to him, kept a part of herself hidden for fear of losing him. But in the end, her silence had caused the very thing she had been trying to avoid. "Please," Natalie begged, her voice trembling. "Please just give me a chance to make this right. I love you, Brandon. I've always loved you." Brandon's face hardened. "I don't even know who you are anymore." And with that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Natalie alone once again. As the days turned into weeks, the distance between Brandon and Natalie only grew. Brandon had moved out of their home, refusing to speak to Natalie or respond to her messages. He was consumed by his anger and hurt, unable to see a way forward from the betrayal he had experienced. Natalie, on the other hand, was devastated by the loss of her marriage. She had always known that telling Brandon about her past would be difficult, but she had never imagined it would end like this. It was late one night when Brandon finally returned home, but he was heavily drunk, and they started a heated argument. In the heat of the moment, as their argument reached a fever pitch, Brandon lost control. His hands, trembling with rage, reached for Natalie, grabbing her in a moment of blind fury. He didn't mean to hurt her. He didn't mean for things to go as far as they did. But before he knew it, Natalie was on the floor, her body motionless. The room fell into an eerie silence. The only sound was Brandon's ragged breathing as he stood over her, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He knelt beside Natalie, shaking her, calling out her name, but she didn't respond. Panic set in as he realized what he had done. "Oh God," Brandon whispered, his voice barely audible. "What have I done?" In a state of shock, Brandon stumbled out of the house, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble of fear, guilt, and disbelief. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He hadn't meant to hurt her. He ran, fleeing from the scene of the crime, hoping that somehow he could escape the reality of what he had done. Natalie's body was discovered later that evening after a concerned neighbor, Mrs. Cooper, heard the commotion and called the police. The investigators arrived at the scene, finding Natalie lifeless on the floor of the couple's home. There were signs of a struggle, but no immediate clues as to who was responsible. Brandon was nowhere to be found. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Brandon was the prime suspect. The police discovered the emails on Natalie's laptop, revealing the secret she had kept from her husband. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. The heated argument, Brandon's sudden disappearance, and the tragic outcome. For days, Brandon was on the run, hiding from the authorities as he grappled with the enormity of what he had done. But the guilt was too much to bear. He knew that he couldn't run forever. Eventually, Brandon turned himself in, walking into a police station with his head hung low, ready to face the consequences of his actions. The trial was a media spectacle, drawing attention from across the country. The story of a newlywed husband discovering his wife's transgender identity and the resulting tragedy captivated the public's imagination. Both Brandon and Natalie's families were thrust into the spotlight, their private pain laid bare for the world to see. Brandon's defense team, led by attorney Jonathan Clark, argued that he had acted in the heat of the moment, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't control. They painted a picture of a man who had been deceived, whose world had been turned upside down by a secret that shattered the foundation of his marriage. But the prosecution, led by Rachel Williams, argued that Brandon's actions were inexcusable, that no amount of emotional turmoil could justify taking another person's life. They presented evidence of the physical altercation, highlighting the fact that Brandon had left Natalie to die, fleeing the scene rather than seeking help. The trial was long and grueling, with both sides presenting emotional testimony. Brandon's family, particularly his parents Paul and Linda Foster, spoke of the loving, kind man they had known, struggling to reconcile that image with the man who had killed his wife. Natalie's family, devastated by her death, spoke of the pain and loss they felt, their daughter's life cut tragically short by a man who had claimed to love her. In the end, Brandon was found guilty of manslaughter. The jury convinced that while he hadn't intended to kill Natalie, his actions had been reckless and violent. He was sentenced to several years in prison, a punishment that felt both too little and too much for a man who had acted out of a momentary lapse in control. The aftermath of the trial left both families shattered. Brandon's family struggled to come to terms with what he had done. His parents, who had always seen him as a kind and gentle soul, were devastated by the reality that their son was responsible for the death of his wife. They visited him in prison, but their conversations were strained, the weight of what had happened hanging heavy between them. Natalie's family, on the other hand, was consumed by grief. They had lost their daughter in the most horrific way imaginable, and no amount of justice could ever bring her back. They struggled with feelings of anger and sadness, their hearts broken by the loss of a woman who had overcome so much in her life, only to be taken away so suddenly. In the wake of the tragedy, both families were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The media moved on to the next big story, but for those left behind, the pain remained. Now behind bars, Brandon spent his days reflecting on the choices he had made, the life he had destroyed in a single tragic moment of rage. The story of Brandon and Natalie is one of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of secrets kept for too long. It serves as a reminder of the fragility of relationships, of how quickly love can turn to anger, and how the choices we make in moments of intense emotion can have far-reaching consequences. For Brandon, the cost of his actions was immeasurable. He lost his wife, his freedom, and the life he had envisioned for himself. But more than that, he lost a part of himself. The man he had once been, replaced by the man who had taken another person's life in a moment of blind fury. For Natalie, the cost was even greater. She had lived her life with courage, embracing her true self despite the challenges she had faced. But in the end, it was the love she had for Brandon, the fear of losing him, that led to her tragic end. For those who knew Brandon and Natalie, their story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrets, the importance of honesty, and the devastating power of anger. As the years rolled by, the sharp edges of the tragedy dulled slightly, but the scars remained for those involved. In prison, Brandon enrolled in counseling, trying to understand the emotions that had driven him to such a devastating act. It was in these sessions that he began to confront his own insecurities, his fears, and the toxic masculinity that had played a part in his inability to handle Natalie's secret. He spoke openly of his love for her and the profound loss he felt, but there was always the unspoken knowledge that none of it could change what he had done. Natalie's family, though irreparably broken by her loss, found solace in honoring her memory. They established a foundation in her name to support LGBTQ+ individuals, offering education and resources to help foster understanding and acceptance. They hoped that in sharing Natalie's story, others might be spared the kind of heartbreak and violence that had claimed her life. The media had long moved on, but the echoes of Brandon and Natalie's story remained, a powerful reminder of the complexities of identity, love, and acceptance. The lessons of their short-lived marriage became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of honesty, communication, and empathy in relationships. The story ended with a reflection on the broader issues that their story illuminated, how secrets, even those rooted in fear, can tear apart the very foundations of love. Experts weighed in, discussing the importance of education and understanding, urging society to foster environments where people can feel safe to live authentically without fear of judgment or rejection. If I had known then what I know now, things would have been different. I would have loved Natalie for who she truly was, but now it's too late, Brandon said in prison, his voice broken. The lesson was clear. Love can only thrive where honesty lives, and the cost of secrets can be more than anyone is willing to pay.
In the quiet town of Frederick, Colorado, a seemingly perfect family was torn apart by an unthinkable act of betrayal. This is the story of Chris Watts, a man who shattered his own family and shocked the world. Chris and Shannon Watts appeared to have it all. A loving marriage, 2 beautiful daughters, Bella and Celeste, and a baby boy on the way. But behind closed doors, trouble was brewing. While on a business trip, Shannon noticed an unusual $60 charge on their joint credit card. This slip-up was the first sign of Chris's affair with his co-worker, Nicole Kessinger.
I'm having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast. I am so out of breath.
Chris met Nicole Kessinger at work, and their relationship quickly turned romantic. Chris went to great lengths to hide his affair, even using a secret calculator app to store their messages and photos. The weekend before the tragedy, Chris spent time with his daughters at a birthday party. But behind his smiles, he was planning the unthinkable. In the early hours of August 13, 2018, Chris executed his horrifying plan. He smothered his daughters and strangled Shannon. He then transported their bodies to an oil site where he disposed of them in crude oil tanks. When Shannon's friend Nicole Atkinson couldn't reach her, she called the police. Officers arrived at the Watts home and found disturbing signs leading to a swift investigation.
Hi.
Here, Nicole?
Yes.
Okay. What's going on?
So my friend, we were out of town for a business trip this weekend.
All right.
And I dropped her off at 2 o'clock this morning. She's 15 weeks pregnant. She wasn't feeling well. And she had a doctor's appointment this morning at 9, and I told her to let me know if she needed me to take her. She's got 2 little girls. And she was very distraught over the weekend, wasn't eating normally or drinking, and we kept trying to force it on her because she's pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband and her supposedly are separating, but she didn't know this. She thought they were just having issues. He disclosed that to me today.
Okay.
Because I called him and I was like, have you talked or heard from Shanann since she left for work this morning? Because I can't get a hold of her. I've called, I've texted. Her car's in the garage. Her shoes she wears every single day are right in the front door.
She only has one vehicle?
No, they only have the one vehicle in his work truck.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. There's
She
not
took the girls and went on a play date, but they're 4 and 2. She went on a play date. Why wouldn't she take in a car? They're both in car seats.
The officer gets Chris on the phone and asks him where his wife and kids are. Chris replies he doesn't, but he will be home in about 5 minutes.
Scott, how you doing? How's it going? So this is the only vehicle she would have? Only one that she would drive? Okay.
She can watch this.
Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
That's it. Take that mic off.
Initially, Chris claimed his family was missing. However, inconsistencies in his story and a failed polygraph test led to his arrest. Under pressure, Chris confessed to the murders, initially blaming Shannon.
I want to protect her. What? I want to protect her. You don't want to protect her. I don't know what else to say. Huh? She hurt him? Yeah. And well, no, that's about her. You hurt her. Did they leave after that? For a long time? So she started her games. Well, you guys want to what? She smelled it. Or choking. I didn't hear anything. And then when I was downstairs, I came back up. And wasn't my kid. So sweet. And it's not that one time. You were leaving, but he was going to work. She freaked out over the separation right now. I think she laid back down, and that's when I went downstairs, but I heard like a little commotion upstairs, but I didn't think anything of it. And then we went back upstairs, and she was there. I could see, like, she was not up. I was choking her for her. Did she kill her? They're blue. Both of them? Yeah. She took both of them then. I freaked out when she had me with her. How was it though? I figured like called cops about it. So we could be all the bodies off or something. I mean, I didn't know what else to do. I freaked out. I didn't know nothing else to do. I didn't know what to do. So she killed Lucy's son, choked to death. And lost it and choke her. That's rage.
Chris, go and stand up for me. I'm going to have you face that wall over there. Yeah, just face it. Lift up your hands. Okay, go and face this wall. Okay, go and face me. Okay, you don't have anything on you, right? Okay, nothing in your pockets? Okay, go and face that other wall behind you. I'm just going to search you real quick. Spread your legs. Further. Okay, turn around and face me. No earrings, necklaces, anything like that? Okay. Let's walk out this way. Go straight. Go out that door to your left. Seat.
Drama in court as the cold-hearted killer who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 daughters is sentenced. The father of slain Shannon Watts gave an emotional statement venting his anger and grief.
You heartless monster, you have no heart or feelings or love. Prison is too good for you. This is hard to say, but may God have mercy on your soul.
Shannon's mother reminded Watts of a heartbreaking video his daughter Bella recorded.
My daddy is a hero. He helps me grow up, son.
We loved you like a son. We trusted you. Your faithful wife trusted you. Your children adored you.
The DA revealed gruesome new details about the murders. As Watts strangled his wife, it would have taken up to 4 minutes to end her life. Then he smothered his 2 daughters. 4-year-old Bella fought back as her dad was killing her. Even more shocking, just hours after burying his wife and dumping his daughters' bodies in oil tanks, he was back with his co-workers acting as if nothing had happened. Even his own mother expressed horror at Watt's crimes. A tear rolled down his cheek as she spoke.
This is something we will never get over. We will always mourn the loss of our family. I am still struggling to understand how and why this tragedy occurred.
He kept his head bowed as his mother turned to look at him. He did not look back at her.
We love you, and we forgive you, son.
33-year-old Watts was offered an opportunity to speak, but his attorney apologized on his behalf.
Would you like to make a statement?
No, sir.
Although he understands that words are hollow at this point, he is sincerely sorry for all of this.
When it was time to hear his fate, Watts' legs shook uncontrollably beneath the defense table.
The court is going to sentence you, sir, to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole.
District Attorney Michael Work said there will always be unanswered questions about the horrified crime.
I don't think he will give an honest assessment of why he did what he did, how he did what he did, and I don't think that there is ever going to be a satisfactory answer for anyone.
The tragedy left deep scars on both the Rusek and Watts families. Shannon's family faced harassment and threats, but they remained dignified in their grief. Chris now serves his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Despite his heinous crimes, he receives letters of support from women who see him as misunderstood. "In my heart, you're a great guy," writes a woman named Candace. "If you do write me back, I'd be the happiest girl alive, that's for sure." She signed off with hashtags Team Chris. "Chris is innocent, love him, and so cute." Another woman named Tatiana wrote, "I found myself thinking a lot about you." That's a photo of herself in a bikini. A woman named Kim wrote, "I'm hoping to brighten your days." Hannah wrote Chris Watts' name in flowery calligraphy and told him, "I feel this connection to you." Many of the letters, which were released by prosecutors, are signed with hearts and X's and O's for hugs and kisses. The case took a toll on everyone involved, including law enforcement officers who struggled with PTSD after witnessing the horrors of the crime. Nicole Kessinger faced intense scrutiny, but was not charged with any crime. She lost her job and moved away, applying for a name change to escape the spotlight. This case reminds us of the fragile nature of trust and the devastating impact of betrayal. Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico were deeply loved and will always be remembered. The Rusek family continues to honor their memory with grace and strength. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join the conversation in the comments below, and let's remember the victims with compassion and respect.
At the center of this tragic story were 3 individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Nicholas Granger, a charismatic local real estate developer, Jenna Whitfield, a devoted high school guidance counselor, and Leah Brooks, a newcomer with a mysterious past. Their fates collided in a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and deceit that would leave 2 of them dead, and the third forever changed. Nicholas Granger was born and raised in Rosewood, California, the only child of David and Margaret Granger. From an early age, it was clear that Nicholas was destined for success. His father, a prominent local architect, instilled in him a strong work ethic and an unwavering ambition. His mother, former beauty queen turned socialite, taught him the art of charm and social grace. Growing up, Nicholas excelled in both academics and athletics. He was captain of the high school basketball team, president of the student council, and valedictorian of his graduating class. After high school, Nicholas attended Stanford University, where he studied business and urban development. But there was another side to Nicholas Granger, one that few people saw. Behind his winning smile and easy charm lay a calculating mind and an insatiable hunger for control. He was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them for his own gain. In both business and his personal life, Nicholas viewed relationships as transactions, always looking for what he could get out of them. Despite his success, Nicholas was never satisfied, craved constant validation and attention, a need that manifested in a string of romantic conquests. He was known as a ladies' man, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. But as he approached his mid-30s, Nicholas began to feel the pressure to settle down, at least outwardly. He knew that having a wife would enhance his image as a respectable businessman and pillar of the community. It was with this mindset that Nicholas entered into relationships with both Jenna Whitfield and Leah Brooks. In Jenna, he saw the perfect candidate for the role of Mrs. Granger, attractive, well-liked, and from a good family. Leah, on the other hand, represented excitement and passion, a secret indulgence he had no intention of giving up. Little did Nicholas know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, set in motion by the very women he thought he could control. Jenna Whitfield was the epitome of the girl next door. Born and raised in Rosewood, she was the middle child in a family of 5, with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her parents, William and Susan Whitfield, were pillars of the community. Her father was the town's beloved pediatrician, and her mother was a longtime volunteer at the local animal rescue center. Jenna's childhood was marked by warmth and stability. The Whitfield household was always bustling with activity, filled with laughter and the aroma of her mother's home-cooked meals. This nurturing environment shaped Jenna into a compassionate and empathetic young woman, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear to those in need. Upon completing her degree, Jenna secured a position as a guidance counselor at Rosewood High School. It was at a local charity event, organized to raise funds for the school's new library, that Jenna first met Nicholas Granger. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Nicholas wooed Jenna with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Jenna, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Leah Brooks arrived in Rosewood like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Jenna and Nicholas, Leah was an outsider. Having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of Massachusetts, her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness, experiences that shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Leah was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Leah with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Leah was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in Boston, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Leah worked as a marketing executive in Boston for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Leah decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Rosewood. Leah was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Rosewood, Leah quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Leah first encountered Nicholas Granger. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Nicholas, Leah saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Leah and Nicholas began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Leah's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Nicholas's engagement to Jenna. This betrayal would trigger all of Leah's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Rosewood. As summer turned to fall in Rosewood, the lives of Nicholas, Jenna, and Leah became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Nicholas, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Jenna, Nicholas played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Jenna, basking in the glow of their engagement, excitedly shared details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Nicholas's encounters with Leah took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns or at Leah's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Nicholas showered Leah with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Jenna. He fed Leah's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Jenna. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Jenna and Leah. Even though Jenna remained unaware of the true nature of Leah's relationship with Nicholas, the two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Leah's presence invariably drawing Nicholas's attention away from his fiancée. Jenna, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Leah. Sensing the newcomer's loneliness, she invited Leah to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Nicholas and Leah to cross paths. Leah, consumed by her feelings for Nicholas and racked with guilt over betraying Jenna's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous toward Jenna and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Leah's apparent instability. Nicholas observed the growing friction between the two women with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affection. As autumn progressed and the date of Nicholas and Jenna's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Leah's demands for Nicholas to leave Jenna grew more frequent and desperate, while Jenna remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Rosewood and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Nicholas and Jenna's wedding arrived. The entire town of Rosewood seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Jenna, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, face beaming with joy and love. Nicholas stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom, but those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior. As he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Jenna for all eternity, his thoughts couldn't help but stray to Leah. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Leah was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the union of Nicholas and Jenna, Leah's emotions surged to a breaking point. The sound was almost unbearable. Cruel reminder that the life she had imagined for herself was slipping away. Every cheer, every congratulatory word that drifted from inside the church felt like a hammer driving a nail into her heart. She gripped the wrought iron fence outside the churchyard, her knuckles white as she struggled to contain the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Inside the church, the ceremony proceeded as planned. Jenna's smile was radiant as she exchanged vows with Nicholas, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. The congregation watched in admiration, many of them envious of the seemingly perfect couple standing before them. Nicholas, for his part, played his role with practiced ease. Deep within, there was a gnawing anxiety, a sense that the walls were closing in around him. His thoughts kept drifting back to Leah, to the affair that now felt like a ticking time bomb. He wondered if she would keep her distance, or if she would do something rash. As the couple was pronounced husband and wife, applause filled the church, and Nicholas leaned in to kiss his bride. Jenna wrapped her arms around him, lost in the moment, unaware of the turmoil that brewed just outside. Leah, still outside the church, heard the applause and the murmur of voices as people began to file out. She stepped back into the shadows, hiding her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. She couldn't bring herself to leave. She had to see them, had to witness the finality of it all with her own eyes. When Nicholas and Jenna emerged from the church, the crowd erupted in cheers, tossing flower petals into the air. The newlyweds made their way down the steps, hands clasped tightly together, their smiles wide and genuine. Leah watched from her hidden vantage point, her heart pounding in her chest. The sight of Nicholas, arm in arm with Jenna, laughing and basking in the attention of the crowd, sent a wave of nausea through her. She felt as though she was suffocating, each breath harder to take than the last. As Nicholas helped Jenna into the waiting car, Leah's mind raced. A part of her wanted to run to him, to beg him to take her back, to somehow undo the events that had led to this moment. But another part, the darker, more desperate side, knew that things had gone too far for such pleas. She stood frozen in place, torn between the urge to act and the crushing weight of her despair. The car pulled away, tin cans clattering behind it, and Leah's knees buckled. She sank to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound of the car fading into the distance was the death knell of her hopes and dreams. She was left with nothing but the cold realization that Nicholas had chosen Jenna, that he had moved on, leaving her behind to deal with the wreckage of their affair. In the days that followed, Leah's despair deepened into something more dangerous. Her thoughts became increasingly consumed with revenge, the idea of making Nicholas and Jenna pay for the pain they had caused her. She began to formulate a plan, one that would bring her the closure she so desperately needed, even if it meant crossing lines she had never imagined crossing before. In the weeks following Nicholas and Jenna's wedding, Leah Brooks spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, future with Nicholas, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Leah tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Nicholas and Jenna's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Leah at every turn. As her pain deepened, Leah's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings, or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Leah's growing obsession with Jenna truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young counselor, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Leah convinced herself that if she could just understand Jenna, figure out what made her so special in Nicholas's eyes, she could win him back. Leah's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Jenna, cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Jenna's life and her relationship with Nicholas. As weeks turned into months, Leah's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Jenna was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Nicholas's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Jenna moving away or realizing she didn't love Nicholas after all. But gradually, Leah's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Leah maintained sporadic contact with Nicholas. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Leah alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Jenna and icy accusations of betrayal. Nicholas, growing uncomfortable with Leah's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Rosewood, Leah's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Jenna was not just for her own benefit, but for Nicholas's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage, and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Leah stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. But then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Nicholas kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Jenna Whitfield Granger left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Rosewood's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Jenna, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Jenna, Leah Brooks was waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Jenna's form appeared through the mist, Leah took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Leah, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Jenna's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Jenna an hour later. By then, it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Jenna was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Rosewood like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Leah's plans seemed to have worked perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Leah had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town, both before and after the time of Jenna's death. Nicholas, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Sarah Monroe, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Jenna's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Leah watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Jenna was gone. Now surely, Nicholas would be hers. But as the days passed and Nicholas remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Jenna's death, Rosewood was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Monroe's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Jenna. Nicholas Granger maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Jenna's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Jenna's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Leah, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attack. She obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Monroe delved deeper into Jenna's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Nicholas's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Jenna in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Leah. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Jenna's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calmness in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Leah's alibi seemed airtight, but Monroe sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Leah's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Nicholas had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Jenna's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meeting. Frustrated and confused, Leah decided to confront Nicholas at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Nicholas in an intimate embrace with a woman she did not recognize. The sight sent Leah reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on Leah. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. The realization was devastating. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Leah stormed into Nicholas's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Leah unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Nicholas of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Jenna. Nicholas, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Leah that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Jenna's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Leah fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Nicholas's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Leah was unaware that her confrontation with Nicholas had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Leah had seen with Nicholas was Sophia Larson, brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Nicholas's firm. Sophia had been drawn into an affair with Nicholas, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Leah, Sophia was not blind to Nicholas's true nature. On the night of Leah's confrontation with Nicholas, Sophia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Nicholas's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Sophia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Nicholas continuing to play the role of grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Sophia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Nicholas's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Jenna's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Sophia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Sophia confronted Nicholas in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Leah to his fraudulent business practices. Nicholas, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Sophia into silence. But Sophia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Nicholas's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Nicholas snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Sophia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Nicholas didn't know was that Sophia, haunted by the fate of Jenna Whitfield Granger, come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Nicholas Granger, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Leah Brooks, crumpled to the floor. Sophia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Sophia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences. She also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Nicholas Granger's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Nicholas Granger reverberated through Rosewood, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Jenna's death to light. As Sophia Larson was taken into custody, the true extent of Nicholas's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Nicholas Granger's death, the investigation into Jenna's murder took on new urgency. Detective Sarah Monroe, armed with the evidence Sophia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Leah Brooks, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Jenna's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Nicholas's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Leah, having confessed to Jenna's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Sophia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter, but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Nicholas's death. The tragic tale of Nicholas Granger, Jenna Whitfield, Leah Brooks, and Sophia Larson would be remembered for years to come, a somber reminder of the darkness and lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces. Michael Hastings, a charismatic 45-year-old real estate developer, and his wife, Olivia, 42-year-old museum curator, were the epitome of success and refinement. Their sprawling 6-bedroom home in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, with its manicured gardens and luxury vehicles parked in the driveway, was the envy of their neighbors. For 15 years, the Hastings had been pillars of their community. They hosted lavish parties, donated generously to local charities, and were active members of the country club. Their 2 children, Emma and Henry, excelled in their private school and extracurricular activities. To the outside world, the Hastings appeared to be living the American dream. But beneath the veneer of perfection, a storm was brewing. In the spring of 2023, the facade began to crumble, revealing a tale of betrayal, illness, and revenge that would shock the community to its core. Michael and Olivia's love story began in the fall of 2003 at the University of California, Berkeley. Michael, a senior majoring in business administration, first spotted Olivia at a campus art exhibition. She was a junior studying art history, her eyes sparkling with passion as she explained the nuances of a particularly striking abstract piece to a group of captivated listeners. Intrigued by her intelligence and beauty, Michael approached her after the crowd dispersed. He introduced himself, fumbling slightly over his words. Olivia was charmed by his genuine interest in her work and his quick wit. They spent hours talking that night, losing track of time as they discovered their shared love of travel, fine cuisine, and classic literature. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romantic gestures and intellectual discussions. Michael wooed Olivia with surprise picnics in the university's botanical gardens, late-night study sessions that turned into deep conversations about their hopes and dreams, and weekend trips to explore the vibrant art scene in San Francisco. After graduation, Michael landed a coveted position at a prestigious real estate development firm, while Olivia pursued her master's degree in art curation. Despite their busy schedules, their relationship flourished. They supported each other's ambitions, celebrating every milestone and comforting each other through setbacks. In the spring of 2008, Michael proposed to Olivia at the top of the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset. He had arranged for a private dinner in a secluded spot overlooking the bay, surrounded by the twinkling lights of the city they both loved. Overwhelmed with emotion, Olivia said yes without hesitation. Their wedding, held the following year at the San Francisco Botanical Garden, was a lavish affair that blended Michael's taste for luxury with Olivia's artistic flair. Friends and family gathered for their union, many commenting on how perfectly matched the couple seemed. The early years of their marriage were filled with joy and ambition. They worked hard, saving money and building their careers. Michael climbed the corporate ladder with determination, while Olivia made a name for herself in the competitive art world. In 2011, they welcomed their daughter, Emma, followed 2 years later by their son, Henry. Parenthood brought new challenges, but also deepened their bond. They tackled sleepless nights and diaper changes as a team, their love growing stronger with each passing day. To all who knew them, Michael and Olivia Hastings were the perfect couple, destined for a lifetime of happiness together. As the years passed and the Hastings' success grew, subtle changes began to appear in their relationship. The first cracks in their seemingly perfect life emerged around 2018, coinciding with a significant promotion for Michael. His new role as vice president at his firm came with a substantial pay increase, but also demanded more of his time and attention. Olivia, who had scaled back her work at the museum to focus on raising their children, found herself increasingly alone. The intimate dinners and weekend getaways that had once been a staple of their relationship became rare occurrences. Michael was often absent, citing late nights at the office and frequent business trips. At first, Olivia tried to be understanding. She threw herself into volunteer work and focused on the children's activities, telling herself that Michael's dedication to his career was for the benefit of their family. However, as months turned into years, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed between them. Friends began to notice the strain at social gatherings. Michael and Olivia no longer gravitated toward each other as they once had. Their playful banter was replaced by polite, almost formal interactions. Olivia's smile, once radiant in her husband's presence, now seemed forced and brittle. Olivia tried to bridge the gap, planning romantic evenings and family outings, but Michael always seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. When she expressed her concerns, he dismissed them, assuring her that everything was fine and that he was just under a lot of pressure at work. As 2022 drew to a close, Olivia couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut any longer. Something was wrong, and it went beyond the normal stresses of a busy life. Little did she know, the true extent of the trouble in her marriage was about to reveal itself in the most devastating way possible. The seeds of destruction for the Hastings marriage were sown on a crisp autumn evening in September 2022. Michael was attending a charity gala at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, an event his wife would normally have accompanied him to. However, Olivia had stayed home with a sick Henry, leaving Michael to represent the family alone. It was there that he first laid eyes on Isabella DeLuca, a 32-year-old up-and-coming financial analyst who had recently transferred to the office of a rival firm. Isabella was everything Olivia was not: young, ambitious, and unencumbered by family responsibilities. Her sleek black gown and confident demeanor caught Michael's attention immediately. They were seated at the same table for dinner, and as the evening progressed, Michael found himself captivated by Isabella's sharp wit and intimate knowledge of the financial world. They talked for hours, their conversation flowing effortlessly from market trends to personal anecdotes. For the first time in years, Michael felt a spark of excitement, a reminder of the passion he had once felt in his younger days. As the gala wound down, they exchanged business cards, both lingering a moment too long as their fingers brushed. Michael told himself it was purely professional interest, but the thought of Isabella lingered in his mind long after he returned home that night. Over the next few weeks, Michael and Isabella began to meet regularly under the guise of networking and potential collaboration between their firms. Coffee meetings turned into working lunches, which evolved into after-work drinks. Each time, Michael found himself sharing more personal details, confiding in Isabella about his frustrations at home and the pressures of his job. Isabella, for her part, was drawn to Michael's power and success. She saw in him a potential mentor and perhaps something more. She listened to his troubles with sympathy, offering understanding and support that Michael felt had been missing from his life. The line between professional and personal blurred rapidly. A late-night strategy session at Isabella's apartment became the catalyst for their first kiss. Overwhelmed by desire and the thrill of the forbidden, Michael crossed a line he had never thought himself capable of crossing. As he drove home that night, guilt warred with exhilaration in his mind. He told himself it was a one-time mistake, that he would end it immediately. But as the days passed, he found himself unable to stay away from Isabella. What had started as a chance encounter quickly developed into a full-blown affair, one that would have catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. In January 2023, while Michael was deepening his involvement with Isabella, Olivia received news that would shake the very foundation of her world. What she had initially dismissed as fatigue and stress-related symptoms turned out to be something far more sinister. After a series of tests and a biopsy, Olivia was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The day she received the diagnosis, Olivia sat alone in the sterile exam room, her mind reeling as the oncologist gently explained the treatment plan. She felt numb, barely registering the doctor's words about chemotherapy, radiation, and survival rates. In that moment, all she wanted was her husband by her side. But Michael was unreachable, his phone going straight to voicemail. When she finally broke the news to Michael that evening, his reaction was a mixture of shock and what Olivia perceived as detachment. He held her as she cried, murmuring words of comfort, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his mind was elsewhere. She attributed his distance to the stress of processing the diagnosis, never suspecting the true reason for his distraction. The following weeks were a whirlwind of appointments and decisions. Olivia threw herself into researching treatment options and support groups, determined to face her battle with courage. Michael accompanied her to doctor's visits and helped arrange for additional help with the children. But there was a palpable tension between them. Internally, Michael was racked with guilt. The timing of Olivia's illness couldn't have been worse, coming just as his affair with Isabella was intensifying. He found himself torn between his duty to his wife and his growing feelings for his mistress. The stress of maintaining his double life while supporting Olivia through her illness began to take its toll. As Olivia prepared to begin her first round of chemotherapy, she reached out to Michael for emotional support, hoping to reconnect with her husband in the face of this life-altering challenge. But the man she had once considered her rock now seemed distant and unreachable. Little did she know the worst of his betrayal was yet to come. As winter melted into spring, Michael Hastings found himself living two entirely separate lives. By day, he was the supportive husband, accompanying Olivia to chemotherapy sessions, managing the household, and maintaining a facade of normalcy for their children. By night, he was Isabella's passionate lover, escaping into a world of excitement and freedom from the burdens of his family life. The guilt of his infidelity, compounded by Olivia's illness, ate away at Michael. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as an excuse to create distance from both women. Late nights at the office became his refuge, a neutral space where he could avoid confronting the reality of his choices. Olivia, weakened by her treatments and focused on her recovery, initially attributed Michael's absences to the demands of his job and the stress of her illness. He leaned heavily on her sister, Rachel, and a close-knit group of friends who rallied around her during this difficult time. They provided the emotional support that seemed to be lacking from her husband, though none of them dared to voice their concerns about Michael's behavior. Meanwhile, Isabella grew increasingly impatient with the limitations of their relationship. She pressed Michael for more of his time and attention, hinting at a future together. Michael, unable to fully commit, but unwilling to let her go, placated her with promises of a vacation together once things settled down at home. As Olivia's treatment progressed, the strain began to show on the entire family. Emma, now 12, became withdrawn and sullen, struggling to cope with her mother's illness and her father's constant absences. 9-year-old Henry developed anxiety, clinging to Olivia and dissolving into tears at the slightest provocation. The once happy home became a place of tension and unspoken resentments. Friends and neighbors began to notice the change in the Hastings family dynamic. Whispers circulated at school pickups and neighborhood barbecues. Some speculated about the toll of Olivia's illness, while others wondered if there was trouble in the marriage. Michael's colleague, Dominic Fitzgerald, had seen him with Isabella at a restaurant across town, but kept his suspicions to himself, unwilling to add to the family's troubles. As summer approached, Michael found himself walking an increasingly precarious tightrope. His performance at work, at home, and with Isabella was beginning to slip. He was irritable, distracted, and prone to mood swings. Olivia, despite her weakened state, sensed that something was deeply wrong, but lacked the energy to confront him directly. The breaking point was approaching, and it would come in a way that none of them could have anticipated. Hey crime case solvers! Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and if you have any thoughts about this case, or have a case of your own you would like us to investigate, leave us a comment. Stay safe, crime case solvers. As Michael planned his getaway with Isabella, he had no idea that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down around him. As July 2023 arrived, bringing with it a heatwave that blanketed San Francisco in sweltering temperatures, Michael Hastings made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of his life and the lives of those around him. With Olivia's chemotherapy scheduled to continue throughout the summer, Michael announced that he needed to take a business trip, close an important deal in the Cayman Islands. Olivia, pale and exhausted from her most recent round of treatment, nodded weakly at the news. She was too drained to question the timing or the necessity of the trip, simply asking him to call regularly to check on her and the children. Michael felt a pang of guilt as he looked at his wife. The guilt wasn't enough to deter him from his plans. In reality, There was no business deal. Michael had arranged a week-long romantic getaway with Isabella, using his connections to book a luxurious private villa on a secluded beach. As he packed his bags, hiding gifts for Isabella among his clothes, he rationalized his actions. He told himself that he deserved this break, that the stress of the past months entitled him to some happiness. The moment Michael and Isabella arrived at their tropical paradise, they threw caution to the wind. They spent their days lounging on the beach, sipping cocktails, and indulging in expensive meals. Their nights were filled with passion, both of them reveling in the freedom to be together openly. Michael pushed thoughts of Olivia and his children to the back of his mind, fully immersing himself in the fantasy of a life with Isabella. Back in San Francisco, Olivia's condition took a turn for the worse. The side effects of her latest treatment hit her hard, leaving her bedridden and feverish. Rachel moved in temporarily to help with the children, and Olivia's care, growing increasingly frustrated with her brother-in-law's absence. She tried repeatedly to reach Michael, but his phone went unanswered. It was Emma who unwittingly set in motion the events that would expose Michael's betrayal. Worried about her mother and angry at her father's absence, she decided to use the emergency credit card Michael had given her to order flowers for Olivia. When the card was declined, she called the customer service number, posing as Olivia to inquire about recent transactions. The customer service representative, fooled by Emma's act, revealed a list of charges from the Cayman Islands: luxury restaurants, high-end boutiques, and a jewelry store. Emma, confused and upset, shared this information with her Aunt Rachel. Rachel, her suspicions finally confirmed, decided it was time to take action. She hired a private investigator who quickly uncovered the truth about Michael's business trip and his ongoing affair with Isabella. Armed with this information and evidence, Rachel sat down with Olivia to reveal the extent of her husband's betrayal. With gentle words, but unflinching honesty, she shared the evidence gathered by the private investigator: photos of Michael and Isabella together in the Cayman Islands, records of extravagant purchases, and time-stamped footage of them entering and leaving their villa. Olivia listened in stunned silence, her fingers clutching the arm of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. As the full picture of Michael's duplicity emerged, a myriad of emotions washed over her: shock, anger, humiliation, and finally, a steely resolve. When Rachel finished speaking, Olivia remained quiet for a long moment. Then, with a voice steadier than she felt, she asked, "What do we do now?" Rachel, relieved that her sister's response wasn't one of despair, replied, "Whatever you want to do, I'm here for you, no matter what." It was at that moment, with her sister's unwavering support and the harsh truth laid bare before her, that Olivia began to formulate her plan for revenge. She would not let cancer or her husband's betrayal define her. Instead, she would take control of her narrative and secure her future on her own terms. As Olivia absorbed the crushing reality of Michael's infidelity, a transformation took place within her. The initial shock and heartbreak quickly gave way to a cold, calculated anger. Despite her weakened physical state, Olivia's mind sharpened with purpose. She realized that while cancer had threatened to take her life, Michael had chosen to destroy their marriage. In the quiet hours of the night, as her children slept and Rachel kept vigil, Olivia began to formulate her plan. She would not be a victim, not of cancer, and certainly not of her husband's betrayal. With a clarity she hadn't felt in months, Olivia decided to take control of her future, starting with the financial security Michael had so carelessly jeopardized. The next morning, Olivia contacted Daniel Harper, a shrewd divorce attorney known for his ruthless approach to high-profile cases. In a private consultation, Daniel laid out Olivia's options, explaining that given the circumstances, she had a strong case for an advantageous settlement. However, Olivia had other ideas. With Daniel's reluctant guidance and Rachel's unwavering support, Olivia set her plan in motion. She began by meticulously documenting Michael's affair and his abandonment during her illness. Next, she reached out to her old contacts in the art world, discreetly inquiring about quick private sales for several valuable pieces in their collection. The most crucial and risky part of her plan involved their joint assets. Using her power of attorney, which Michael had granted her years ago for emergencies, Olivia began the process of liquidating their accounts. She worked tirelessly, making calculated moves to convert their investments into cash without raising immediate alarms. As she worked, Olivia was fueled by a mix of righteous anger and a newfound determination to secure her children's future. She set up new accounts in her name only, transferring funds with precision. The family's vacation home in Lake Tahoe was quietly put on the market and sold to a cash buyer within days. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, Olivia maintained the outward appearance of a woman focused solely on her health. She continued her treatments, attended support group meetings, and even managed to keep up a normal routine for Emma and Henry. Only Rachel knew the full extent of Olivia's actions, serving as both confidant and accomplice in her sister's bold plan. As the days passed and Michael's return drew near, Olivia felt a grim satisfaction. She had taken back control in the most profound way possible. Now, all that remained was to wait for the man who had betrayed her to come home and face the consequences of his action. On a sunny Saturday afternoon in late July, Michael Hastings returned home from his Cayman Islands business trip, canned and relaxed. As he pulled into the driveway of their Pacific Heights mansion, he felt a twinge of guilt, knowing he'd have to slip back into the role of devoted husband and father. He had no idea that his carefully constructed double life was about to implode. Entering the unusually quiet house, Michael called out for Olivia and the children. The silence that greeted him was unnerving. He made his way to the kitchen, where he found a thick manila envelope on the counter, his name written in Olivia's elegant script. With a growing sense of dread, Michael opened the envelope. Inside, he found divorce papers along with a letter from Olivia detailing her knowledge of his affair and his absence during her cancer treatments. The final paragraph of the letter informed him that she had liquidated their joint assets, taking what she deemed her fair share after years of supporting his career and raising their family. Panic rising, Michael rushed to his home office and attempted to log in to their online banking accounts. Access denied. He called his investment manager, only to learn that most of their portfolio had been sold off over the past week. The vacation home sold, their valuable art collection gone. As the reality of his situation sank in, Michael collapsed into his leather office chair, his mind reeling. His phone buzzed with a message from Isabella, asking about their plans for the coming weekend. Michael stared at the screen, the life he thought he wanted now seeming hollow and misguided in the face of everything he had lost. Just then he heard the front door open. Footsteps approached his office, too heavy to be Olivia's. The door swung open to reveal Rachel, her face a mask of cold fury. She was there to ensure he understood the full magnitude of his mistakes and the consequences that were only beginning to unfold. Special Agent Victoria Vega of the FBI's White Collar Crime Division had been assigned to investigate the case. Her team began the painstaking process of tracing the movement of the Hastings assets, looking for any signs of fraudulent activity or money laundering. What they uncovered was a complex web of transactions, all meticulously documented and, much to their surprise, entirely legal. Olivia's use of her power of attorney had been within her rights, and she had been careful to keep her actions just within the bounds of the law. However, the investigation did bring to light some questionable financial practices on Michael's part. His expense accounts revealed a pattern of lavish spending that extended far beyond his trip with Isabella. There were irregular cash withdrawals, undeclared gifts, and suggestions of attempts to hide assets offshore. As Agent Vega dug deeper, she uncovered connections between Michael and several companies that had recently been under scrutiny for insider trading. While not directly implicated, the evidence suggested that Michael had been walking a fine ethical line in his professional dealings. In the spring of 2024, nearly a year after the implosion of the Hastings family, the case finally went to trial. Michael's lawyers attempted to paint Olivia as a vindictive woman who had overreacted to a simple indiscretion, illegally seizing assets in a fit of jealous rage. They argued that her actions had not only destroyed Michael's life, but had negatively impacted their children and potentially compromised client funds at his firm. Olivia's team, led by the sharp-tongued Daniel Harper, methodically dismantled this narrative. They presented evidence of Michael's long-term affair, his neglect during Olivia's cancer treatment, and the paper trail of his own financial misdeeds. Witnesses, including Rachel and several of Michael's former colleagues, testified to his erratic behavior and ethical lapses in the months leading up to the discovery of his infidelity. The most damning testimony came from Isabella DeLuca, who, in exchange for immunity, revealed the full extent of her relationship with Michael, including his promises to leave Olivia and his dismissive comments about his wife's illness. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the case had evolved beyond a simple divorce proceeding. The judge, forced to consider the complexities of the situation, had to weigh not only the dissolution of the marriage, but also the potential criminal aspects of Michael's financial dealings. After weeks of dramatic testimony and skillful legal maneuvering, the court prepared to render its verdict. Michael Hastings was found guilty of multiple financial crimes and sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security prison. The judge, in his ruling, noted that while Olivia's actions had been bold and aggressive, they were ultimately justified given Michael's betrayal and the broader context of his unethical behavior. The court awarded Olivia full custody of the children and granted her the majority of the couple's remaining assets, ensuring that she and her children would be financially secure despite the turmoil they had endured. As Michael was led away in handcuffs, the reality of his situation finally sank in. He had not only lost his freedom, but also the respect of his peers, the love of his family, and the life he had spent years building. In his absence, Olivia thrived. She completed her cancer treatment and went into remission, her health steadily improving as she focused on rebuilding her life. She returned to her work at the museum, channeling her pain and anger into curating exhibitions that celebrated resilience and the power of the human spirit. Her story, once one of betrayal and loss, became one of empowerment and survival. Emma and Henry, though deeply affected by the events, found solace in their mother's strength. With the support of Rachel and their close-knit community, they began to heal, finding new ways to cope with the changes in their lives. As time passed, the Hastings family moved forward, leaving behind the shadows of the past, but never forgetting the lessons they had learned. In the end, Olivia's journey was not just about revenge, but about reclaiming her life and ensuring a future for herself and her children on her own terms. She had faced the darkest moments of her life and emerged stronger, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. Rebecca and Thomas Winslow's love story began like a fairy tale. They met as undergraduates at Wellesley College, where Rebecca studied art and Thomas pursued a degree in business administration. Rebecca captivated Thomas from the moment he saw her by the campus lake. Thomas, tall and charismatic with a disarming smile, wooed Rebecca with his charm and ambition. They married shortly after graduation, with dreams of building a life together in their hometown. Rebecca secured a position as an art teacher at Newton High School, where her passion for creativity and nurturing young talent quickly made her a favorite among students and faculty alike. Thomas, leveraging his family connections, landed a job at a prestigious local investment firm, climbing the corporate ladder with remarkable speed. As the years passed, the Winslows became pillars of the Wellesley community. They were fixtures at galas and town council meetings. Their home in Brookline became a symbol of their success, purchased with Thomas's growing wealth. Rebecca's artistic touch was evident in every room, from the hand-painted murals in the living room to the carefully curated sculptures in their backyard. To the outside world, Rebecca and Thomas were the epitome of a power couple. They complemented each other perfectly. Rebecca's creativity balanced Thomas's business acumen. Her warmth softened his sometimes brusque demeanor. Friends often remarked on how they still looked at each other with the same adoration they had in college. Yet, beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, there were undercurrents of tension. Rebecca and Thomas had been trying to conceive for years without success. The strain of fertility treatments and dashed hopes began to wear on their relationship. Thomas threw himself into his work, spending long hours at the office, while Rebecca found solace in her art and her students. It was during this challenging time that Rebecca's relationship with her mother, Margaret Lawson, became a source of comfort and support. Margaret, a widow who lived on the outskirts of town, had always been a free spirit. In her youth, she had traveled the world as a photojournalist, settling down in Wellesley only after meeting Rebecca's father. After his passing, Margaret retreated into a quieter life, focusing on her garden and her volunteer work at the local animal shelter. As Rebecca spent more time with her mother, Thomas found himself drawn into Margaret's orbit as well. What began as polite conversation during family dinners slowly evolved into something more, setting the stage for a betrayal that would tear the Winslow family apart. The seeds of the affair between Thomas and Margaret were planted on a crisp autumn evening. Rebecca, consumed with preparing for an upcoming art exhibition featuring her students' work, was preoccupied. Thomas, feeling neglected and frustrated by the growing distance in his marriage, decided to visit Margaret's cottage alone, ostensibly to check on his mother-in-law. Margaret, surprised but pleased by the unexpected visit, welcomed Thomas with a warm smile and a glass of her homemade wine. As they sat in her small, cluttered living room, surrounded by eclectic souvenirs from her travels, Thomas found himself opening up about his marital troubles. Margaret listened with empathy, her eyes, so similar to Rebecca's, filled with understanding. Perhaps it was the wine, the intimate atmosphere, or simply the need for human connection. But that night, a line was crossed. A comforting touch lingered too long. Gaze held more meaning than it should have. By the time Thomas left Margaret's cottage, both knew that something had irrevocably changed. In the weeks that followed, Thomas and Margaret manufactured reasons to see each other. Margaret suddenly needed help with home repairs, while Thomas discovered a newfound interest in gardening. Their clandestine meetings became more frequent, always carefully timed to avoid suspicion. During one of their early encounters, Thomas arrived at Margaret's cottage to help fix a leaky faucet. As they worked side by side in the cramped space of her bathroom, the air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. Their hands brushed accidentally, sending electric shocks through both of them. When Margaret reached past Thomas for a towel, he caught the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and vanilla that made his head swim. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment, neither could look away. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Margaret was showing Thomas how to prune her rose bushes. As she demonstrated the technique, standing close behind him to guide his hands, both were acutely aware of their physical proximity. The gentle brush of her breath on his neck and the warmth of her body against his back sent shivers down Thomas's spine. When he turned to ask a question, their faces were inches apart. Time seemed to stand still as they stood there, frozen in a moment of forbidden desire. During a rare moment alone at a family gathering, Thomas and Margaret stole away to the garden behind the house, hidden from view by a trellis covered in climbing roses. They gave in to their desires. Their kisses were urgent, hands roaming with a desperation born of stolen moments. As they heard Rebecca's voice calling for them, they quickly separated, straightening their clothes and hair. The guilt was immediate, but so was the thrill of their secret affair, adding a dangerous excitement to their illicit encounters. Their affair consumed them, blinding them to the consequences of their actions. In Margaret's bedroom, a space once reserved for solitary nights, they now created a world of secret passion. The creak of bed springs and hushed whispers became a symphony of their illicit love, playing out against the backdrop of familial betrayal. As their physical intimacy deepened, so too did their emotional entanglement. What had started as a physical attraction morphed into something more complex and dangerous. They began to imagine a future together, heedless of the devastation such dreams would wreak on their family. It was this combination of physical passion and emotional connection that would ultimately lead to their undoing. They justified their actions in whispered conversations. Thomas spoke of feeling unappreciated and misunderstood by Rebecca, while Margaret confessed to a loneliness that had plagued her since her husband's death. They convinced themselves that their connection was special, something that transcended the boundaries of the conventional. As the affair deepened, so did their web of lies. Thomas began to invent business trips and late meetings. Margaret feigned illness to avoid family gatherings. They communicated through a secret email account and disposable phones, always careful to cover their tracks. But with each deception, the weight of guilt grew heavier. Thomas found it increasingly difficult to look Rebecca in the eye, while Margaret's interactions with her daughter became strained and awkward. The very relationship that had once been Rebecca's source of comfort was now tainted by betrayal. Neither Thomas nor Margaret could have foreseen the devastating consequences their actions would have on the entire Winslow family. As they continued their illicit liaison, they remained oblivious to the suspicions beginning to form in Rebecca's mind. The first inkling that something was amiss came to Rebecca on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She had decided to surprise Thomas with lunch at his office, only to be told by his confused secretary that he had left early, mentioning a meeting with a client. Rebecca brushed it off as a miscommunication, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Over the following weeks, Rebecca began to notice subtle changes in Thomas's behavior. He was more distracted, often lost in thought during their conversations. His phone would buzz at odd hours, and he would step out of the room to take calls in hushed tones. When questioned, Thomas would dismiss her concerns with vague explanations about work stress and important deals in the pipeline. Rebecca's artistic sensitivity, usually a source of joy in her life, now became a curse as she picked up on minute details that others might have missed. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on Thomas's clothes, a lipstick smudge on a coffee mug he brought home from the office, the way he sometimes avoided her touch. All these observations accumulated in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Her relationship with her mother also began to change. Margaret, once eager to spend time with her daughter, now seemed distant and preoccupied. Their weekly tea sessions became less frequent, with Margaret often canceling at the last minute, citing various commitments. When they did meet, Rebecca sensed a nervousness in her mother's demeanor, a reluctance to meet her eyes that was entirely out of character. As her suspicions grew, Rebecca found herself trapped in a spiral of doubt and self-recrimination. She questioned every interaction, analyzed every word spoken by Thomas and Margaret. Was she imagining things? Had the stress of their fertility struggle and her upcoming exhibition made her paranoid? Determined to find the truth, Rebecca began to investigate discreetly. She checked Thomas's credit card statement, noting several charges at restaurants and hotels that he had never mentioned. She drove by her mother's cottage at odd hours, her heart sinking when she spotted Thomas's car parked down the street on an evening when he was supposedly working late. Each new piece of evidence felt like a physical blow, chipping away at the foundation of trust that had been the bedrock of her life. Rebecca's students and colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor, the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands as she demonstrated brush techniques, a forced smile that never quite reached her eyes. As the days passed, Rebecca became a shadow of her former self, torn between confronting her fears and clinging to the last shreds of hope that she was mistaken. Little did she know that the truth, when it finally came to light, would be even more devastating than she could have imagined. The day Rebecca's world shattered began like any other. It was a Saturday, and she had spent the morning at the school, putting the finishing touches on the student art exhibition. Thomas had left early, mumbling something about a golf game with clients. As Rebecca drove home, her mind preoccupied with last-minute details for the upcoming show, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's cottage. Perhaps a cup of tea and a chat would help calm her nerves. As Rebecca turned onto the quiet lane leading to Margaret's home, her heart nearly stopped. There, parked behind the cottage, was Thomas's sleek black sedan. For a moment, Rebecca sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel. She told herself there could be an innocent explanation. Deep down, she knew. With trembling legs, Rebecca approached the cottage. Curtains were drawn, but through a gap, she could see movement inside. Taking a deep breath, she used her key to unlock the door, pushing it open as quietly as possible. The sight that greeted her would be forever seared into her memory. There, on the floral-patterned couch, they were locked in an intimate embrace, oblivious to the world around them. Margaret's hair was disheveled, and Thomas's shirt was partially unbuttoned. On the coffee table, 2 half-empty wine glasses stood as mute witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, as if sensing her presence, Thomas and Margaret looked up. The expressions on their faces, shock, guilt, and a flicker of defiance, were unmistakable. What followed was a blur of emotions and accusations. Rebecca's anguished cry broke the silence, startling the guilty pair. Thomas jumped to his feet, stammering excuses and pleas. Margaret remained seated, her face ashen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Rebecca, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled questions at them. The answers, when they came, were like daggers to her heart. 6 months. It had started as friendship, then evolved. They hadn't meant for it to happen. They were sorry. Unable to bear their presence any longer, Rebecca fled the cottage. She drove aimlessly for hours, her mind replaying the scene over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of the house she had once considered her sanctuary. As she sat in the darkened living room, surrounded by the trappings of her seemingly perfect life, Rebecca felt something inside her break. Pain, the betrayal, the sheer magnitude of the deception. In that moment, a cold resolve began to form in her heart. Someone would have to pay for this betrayal, and Rebecca knew exactly who that someone would be. Hey crime case solvers, interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and if you have any thoughts about this case, or have a case of your own you would like us to investigate, leave us a comment. Stay safe, crime case solvers. The events leading up to the fatal confrontation unfolded over several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Rebecca, having spent the day in a haze of grief and anger, found herself pacing the halls of her home like a caged animal. The tick of the clock in the foyer seemed to mock her, counting down the moments until her world would irrevocably change. As dusk fell, Thomas returned home. He entered cautiously, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. Rebecca watched from the shadows of the dining room as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, familiar routine now tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. Thomas called out Rebecca's name, his voice strained with apprehension. When she stepped into the light, visibly flinched. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the vibrant, loving wife he had known. Rebecca's eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Thomas, his face a mask of guilt and desperation, launched into a litany of excuses and apologies. He spoke of feeling neglected, of the pressures of work and their fertility struggles. He claimed the affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. With each word, Rebecca felt her anger rising, a tide of rage threatening to overwhelm her. Without fully realizing what she was doing, Rebecca found herself walking to Thomas's study. She knew he kept a handgun in the desk drawer, a precaution he had insisted on after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. As if in a trance, she retrieved the weapon, feeling its cold weight in her hand. When she returned to the living room, Thomas's eyes widened in shock and fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his words now coming in a panicked rush. He promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do whatever it took to save their marriage. But Rebecca barely heard him. In her mind, she saw only images of Thomas and Margaret together, their betrayal playing on an endless loop. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Thomas lunged forward, perhaps trying to disarm her. In that moment of chaos and heightened emotion, Rebecca's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the confines of the room, followed by an eerie silence, broken only by the tinkling of shattered glass from a fallen picture frame. Thomas staggered backward, a look of disbelief on his face as he pressed his hand to his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his crisp white shirt crimson. Collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, his eyes locked on Rebecca in a silent plea. As the reality of what she had done crashed over her, Rebecca dropped the gun. It clattered to the hardwood floor, the sound jolting her out of her shocked state. She rushed to Thomas's side, her anger instantly replaced by horror and regret. She pressed her hands against the wound, desperately trying to stem the flow of blood. Thomas's breathing was labored, his skin growing pale. With trembling hands, Rebecca reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice shook as she gave the dispatcher their address, pleading for an ambulance to hurry. As she waited for help to arrive, she cradled Thomas's head in her lap, whispering a mixture of apologies and pleas for him to hold on. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, alerted by the gunshot, began to gather outside. Through the window, Rebecca could see curious faces peering in, their expressions shifting from concern to shock as they took in the scene. She heard muffled voices, someone shouting about calling the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they worked swiftly to stabilize Thomas. Rebecca watched, numb with shock, as they loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to the waiting ambulance. As the sirens faded into the distance, Rebecca found herself alone in the house, surrounded by the evidence of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Claire Bennett took charge of the scene, keen eyes taking in every detail as officers secured the area and began collecting evidence. Detective Bennett approached Rebecca, who sat motionless on the blood-stained couch. In a gentle but firm voice, Detective Bennett informed Rebecca of her rights and asked if she understood what had happened. Rebecca, her voice barely audible, recounted the events of the day, the discovery of the affair, confrontation, and the moment the gun went off. Throughout her statement, she seemed almost detached, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. As Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of her neighbors watching from behind hastily drawn curtains, their faces a mix of horror and fascination. At the Massachusetts General Hospital, Thomas Winslow clung to life in the intensive care unit. The bullet had missed his heart by mere inches, lodging dangerously close to his spine. As he underwent multiple surgeries, a steady stream of colleagues and family friends visited, their hushed conversations in the waiting room filled with speculation and disbelief. Margaret Lawson, racked with guilt and shame, attempted to visit her son-in-law but was turned away by the Winslow family. She retreated to her cottage, refusing to answer calls or open her door. The weight of her role in the tragedy seemed to age her overnight, her once vibrant demeanor replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed look. Detective Bennett, meanwhile, delved deeper into the case. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the events that had led to that fateful night. The more she uncovered about the Winslow family's history and the affair between Thomas and Margaret, the more complex the case became. As the investigation progressed, public opinion in Wellesley began to shift. What had initially been seen as a clear-cut case of attempted murder in a fit of rage was revealed to be a tragedy born of betrayal and shattered trust. The town found itself divided, with some sympathizing with Rebecca's plight, while others condemned her actions as inexcusable. Regardless of the circumstances, one of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Rebecca's best friend and fellow art teacher, Melissa Green, came forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, Rebecca had confided her growing suspicions to Melissa, detailing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Rebecca's emotional turmoil and her struggle to confront the truth, providing valuable insight into her state of mind. Inside the packed courtroom, air was thick with tension. The judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious District Attorney Ethan Harris, painted a picture of Rebecca as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harris argued that the shooting was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Rebecca's defense team, headed by seasoned attorney Jonathan Morales, presented a different narrative. It portrayed Rebecca as a victim of circumstances, a woman pushed to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal. Morales emphasized Rebecca's impeccable character, her contributions to the community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under at the time of the shooting. In their closing arguments, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned pleas to the jury. Harris emphasized the seriousness of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jury to consider the extraordinary circumstances and Rebecca's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury filed out to begin their deliberations, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Rebecca Winslow now rested in their hands, and with it, resolution of a tragedy that had shaken the town of Wellesley to its core. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Rebecca Winslow guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution had pushed for. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, Rebecca standing stoically beside her attorney. The judge, taking into account Rebecca's previously unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Rebecca was mandated to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient, given the severity of the crime, while others believed it appropriately balanced justice with compassion. As Rebecca was led away from the courtroom, the weight of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to finally settle on her shoulder. Thomas, having recovered from his physical wounds, but forever changed by the experience, moved to a different state to start anew. He and Rebecca divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and occasional phone calls. Despite the pain of their shared past, there was a tentative forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Margaret retreated from public life entirely. She lived as a virtual recluse in her cottage, her only contact with the outside world being the occasional visit from a home health aide. The weight of her role in the tragedy had taken a severe toll on her health and spirit. As Wellesley slowly heals and life moves forward, the story of Rebecca, Thomas, and Margaret remains a powerful reminder of how quickly and irrevocably lives can change. It challenges us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust placed in us by our loved ones, and to consider the far-reaching impacts of our choices.